Thank you for coming. I would like to call to order the City of St. Helena regular City Council meeting, Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Noah Hausch has offered to lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and we will move to the roll call.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring.
Here.
Councilmember Koperstein.
Here.
Shuto.
Here.
Knudsen.
Present.
Okay, now we're going to move to public forum. This is where members of the public are entitled to speak on matters of municipal concern not on the agenda during public forum. Each person's comment shall be limited to 4 minutes, and each person is entitled to speak on any non-agendized item only once at any meeting. Brief questions by council members for clarifications may be posed and answered, and council members may make requests that items be placed on future agendas. But in accordance with state law, no substantive discussion or action may take place unless and until the matter properly appears on the agenda. And I would ask that if folks are going to make public comment, to keep it to the 4 minutes, and if there's further wish to engage, to contact us separately. I also want to say that the city is moving forward with the idea of some listening forums so we can have even more ability for dialogue. But in the beginning of each meeting, if we keep it to the 4 minutes, I think that would help in terms of our efficiency. So is there any public comment tonight on any non-agendized item? Please. And the other thing is if there are numerous people, please feel to come up, free to come up and stand in a sort of queue. Thank you.
On cue, if you're...
Good evening. My name is Sue Clark. I am president of the St. Helena Historical Society. I live at 1979 Sulphur Springs Avenue. I'm here tonight to invite Mayor Ellsworth, the City Council, and all in attendance to our 3rd annual History Becomes Art. It is on March 9th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the gallery at Brasswood, and the tickets are $100. Original art auction. There will be 20 artists, including our very own mayor, who will be using our historical photos and creating art from them in their own medium. There will be hors d'oeuvres, wine, live music, and a silent auction. Please come, please support us, please come to our website and help us find a home for the St. Helena Historical Society. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and there's some of these on the back table if anybody's interested.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, I will move on to the reports by staff and City Council, future agenda items, and AB 1234 reports. Are there any reports from our legal department? Mr. Brown? Mr. Presswich, City Manager.
Just 2 reports. First, the city has posted a request for proposals, an RFP for architectural feasibility, planning, visioning for the library, city hall, and recreation facilities. This is posted. The submittals are due March 1st. We've had a number of inquiries, and so we're excited about the enthusiasm for that. More on that in coming meetings. And secondly, our city staff has been preparing for a fairly large weather event that is going to visit us beginning tonight. It's being referred to as another of these atmospheric rivers, so a lot of moisture. Yesterday we were anticipating 3 inches. I would tell you today we're anticipating about 5 inches. The coastal mountains will experience upwards of 12 inches over about a 2-day period. So high winds are associated with this, with the saturated soils. The region, the Bay Area, is anticipating a lot of trees down, some possible power outages. So our staff is aware of this. We're planning for this. We'll get through it. The forecast is the Napa River is not going to be threatened, but we may experience some localized flooding.
Do we have an indication of how long this event is supposed to be here?
It will run through Thursday.
Through Thursday, okay.
Beginning this evening.
Okay, thank you. Our Finance Director, April Mitz.
Thank you. As a follow-up to the CAFR that was presented at the last meeting, our department has been working on what's called a PAFR. It's a popular audited financials report, so it's definitely we love our acronyms. It's consolidated and it's more at a narrative form, and so we're hoping to have it finalized for council for the next meeting just as an informational item.
Thank you. And so that breaks it down into something that's maybe a little clearer for the general public?
It is simplified. I believe it's only 12 or 13 pages, so yes, it does.
Great. Thank you. We'll move on to the city clerk, Cindy Zhafopoulos. Any reports? And then Noah Hausch, planning director.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth and council. I just want to remind the community and the council members that we are intending to present the general plan draft EIR to the Planning Commission on March 19th. So just wanted to remind the community that will be presented. The response to comments as well as the comments will be available for public review when the agenda is posted, and we'd like to hear from members of the community on the adequacy of that report, and that'll be presented to the Planning Commission for their review and hopefully recommendation onto the City Council for adoption.
Thank you very much. Felix Hernandez from the Public Works Department.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, members of council. The city received a traffic advisory from Caltrans, Route 29, one-way traffic controls starting February 25th. So from 8 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., there'll be lane closures between Pratt Avenue and Deer Park Road. Again, it's Monday, February 25th through Friday, March 1st, with the exception of February 27th, 8:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., alternating lane closures.
Thank you. Are there any reports from council? Mr. Knudsen?
Just a report from the Parks and Rec committee that was a couple weeks ago, and the focus from the team and from Andre is really on parks maintenance. So that's really the 2019 focus.
Ms. Chateau?
No report yet. I meet with the library on Wednesday.
Very good. Ms. Cooperstein?
I just want to report back on the UVDS board, the JPA board that I'm part of, and the council recommended that we generously agree to split the extra pot of money that has befallen or landed on the group. So that's the decision, but right now we are also looking for some sort of countywide project that some of the money could be spent on. It might be some kind of litter-related things. There are still people who drive through the community without tarps on their trucks, and a lot of debris floats around. But and there will probably be a list of approved type projects that we could apply for, or we can submit our own request of what we might be interested in using, whatever money comes our way. It has to have a nexus somehow to the whole refuse collection, recycling effort.
How do ideas come to you for that?
You can just email me.
Okay,
No.
great.
And then we don't meet again until March. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Doring?
No, thank you. I'll give the balance of my time to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a few items. The first item is that the city is co-sponsoring an event, a mariachi event, that's going to be at the St. Helena Elementary School Auditorium on March 15th. This is a group, it's a high school group coming down from Wenatchee, Washington, and they're going to be participating with Napa College on the following Saturday with other mariachi groups from UC Berkeley and one from a university in Southern California. And this high school group has graciously offered to come do a concert for our community. And so that will be on the 15th of March at 7 p.m., and we have some flyers in the back. I wanted to mention also that I chatted with Amy Caraba from the Chamber of Commerce, and they've got a couple of things coming up. They've got the Sip and Swirl event, and that's going to happen on Main Street every second and fourth Saturday of the month coming up through the summer. And then also their Celebrate St. Helena event is on March 1st. And so the Chamber website has more information on those issues or those events. And then one final thing, I Valentine's Day is coming up on Thursday, and I am going to admit to having a secret crush. It's not really a secret. I'm madly in love with St. Helena. And so I have prepared a Valentine that I'm going to send to the city, 1480 Main Street, St. Helena, California, for anybody else who wants to send the city a Valentine. I believe if we get these in the mail by tomorrow, the turnaround is quick, and by Valentine's Day, the city could receive more Valentines. So this is going into the mail from me tomorrow. And with that, I will close my comments, and we will move to our consent calendar. So the members of the council or the public may ask that items be considered individually for purpose of consideration, considering alternative action for extended discussion or for public comment. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. And I'm just going to make a little note on this as well, as I did on the public comment. One of the things the city has done recently is extended our agenda period to 10 days before the city meeting. And the idea with this is to sort of create some efficiencies. So if the public or the council has questions on the consent calendar, those can be asked earlier. The week previously, you can get in touch with the city hall or the council members. And if we can answer questions earlier and clarify things, we might have to pull less items from the consent calendar and perhaps get some efficiency with that. The idea is we want as much public comment as we can get, but we want to make sure that we have efficient meetings so staff can make the turnaround. They've got to come back to work tomorrow, so we want this to be an efficient process, but also one where we welcome engagement. So we will move on to the consent calendar, and I am going to pull item 8.4. This is about the recreational vehicle that the city is participating in for Paradise. So I'll pull that, and the other items are 8.1, and if anybody wants to pull one, somebody may, 8.2, and 8.3.
Move approval of the consent calendar,
Second.
with the exception of the one pool, obviously.
Still second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Councilmember Chateau,
Yes.
Councilmember Koberstein,
Yes.
Knudsen,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. And so I pulled 8.4. This is consideration of a resolution supporting a community fundraising effort to purchase and deliver one or more recreational vehicles to assist with temporary shelter for Butte County families in need. This is from the fires that occurred last year. And I believe we have somebody from the community who's going to make a comment.
Is this on? Good. Thank you all.
More recreational vehicles to assist with temporary shelter for Butte County families in need. This is from the fires that occurred last year.
Thank you, Cindy. Are you going to run it?
Great.
Go ahead. This is. That's okay. Well, you can see what Cindy was going to play when you go to the cameo. You got it? Okay. This says more than I can say. My 4 minutes is up.
That's it.
So this is the promotional video for the fundraising effort.
You're so nice to do this. Thank you. I gave this to Cindy and Mark today at the last minute.
I fell in love with this town.
It almost happened here. It did happen there. Months later, thousands of people are still without homes. But St. Helena can help in the healing of this disaster.
One of these days.
That's okay. I'd like to give a plug to the young men who wrote that song. Actually, were victims of the fire in Paradise, got together. They call themselves the Cold Weather Sons, and they wrote that in a shelter in Paradise right after the fire. It is incredibly moving. And I just would like to thank you all for your support of the project. It feels, talk about Valentine's, it feels like a gift from the heart of our city to the folks in Paradise who have so much ahead of them in terms of recovery. Keep it brief here, but there's still, we've learned that there are still people who are living in tents. They were living on their own property. They've been told now that they can no longer live on their own property if FEMA will come in to help. They have to be off their property. So we're feeling that an RV can be something that can be put in a driveway, plugged into somebody's home, a hose. It's self-sufficient, and something that a family can use pretty much anywhere, except on their own property right now. But, and also we've learned through folks on the ground there that there's a need for vehicles, trucks, and cars, which were incinerated. People have still no way, many people have no transportation to get to work, get their kids to school. So that's become part of the project as well. I would like to give a thanks to my incredible committee. One of our absolute most wonderful workers is here tonight, Pat Dell, who is responsible for getting the website up and also connecting us with the Federated Women, who has put us under their 501c3 and created the website for us where you can see this. And also there are other service clubs in town who have given us their sponsorship and have pledged money already before we've even started the fundraising drive, which starts on the 14th. Our goal is $30,000. It's kind of a gulp, but we'll see. There are postcards with information about the project on the back table. They, I'm having the same problems. This is what they look like, and there's information on the back. So do go to the Cameo, because we're pretty proud of this. But I think it's just something that feels like a real community, as I said, from the heart.
And we're
to our
planning
neighbors.
a visit in that direction.
Yes, we are, and Jesse's going to go with us.
That's great.
So thank you all.
One
your
last
support.
question.
Yes,
Where
Anna.
could we see this video if you don't go to the Cameo?
You can, oh yes, if you go to the Federated, and it's on the postcard.
Okay.
It's fwunv.org, and then scroll down, and you'll see the RV to Paradise, and you can see it there.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we are going to approve a resolution or vote on a resolution. So can we have a motion for that?
Sure. I'll move approval of the resolution supporting a community fundraising effort to purchase and deliver one or more recreational vehicles to assist with temporary shelter for Butte County families in need.
Second?
I'd be happy to. Second.
Very good. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Koperstein?
Yes.
Chateau?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. We'll move on. Public hearings, seeing none. We'll move to new business. 10.1 is consideration and proposed approval of a resolution appointing applicants to the Planning Commission and the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee, and consider leaving the recruitment open for the unfilled terms of office until filled. We had an earlier special meeting where we interviewed the candidates for the Planning Commission, and we submitted our notes. Do we want discussion at this point? I will open it to discussion if we want to, or we can take a motion. We'll start with the Planning Commission.
If we could take a 5-minute break so I can record the votes.
Oh, yeah, certainly. So we will take a 5-minute break. We will return at 6:30 and be back with you then. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Ready? Okay, we'll bring the meeting back to order. And before we proceed, I wanted to explain the process by which we used. With the Planning Commission, 2 applicants were here, and both came to the podium and made statements, and we asked questions as a council. And then we each received a ballot for which we put our preference for first and second. With the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee, unfortunately, both applicants couldn't be here this evening, but so we didn't hear anybody speaking tonight, but we had the same ballot with a preferential ranking. Each council member ranked first and second, and those are tallied by the city clerk, and I believe we'll present those to me?
I will announce.
Oh, you will announce, okay. Very good. So is that what you're going to do now?
Mhm.
Okay, very good.
So for the Planning Commission, the first place was Autumn Anderson, with Richard coming in second. The ATSC, Denise Henquit, came in first, and Aaron came in second.
Okay. And what I will say is that we're faced oftentimes at these meetings with the challenge of two excellent candidates. So it's a very hard decision. And what we want to encourage is for those who didn't get chosen for this committee, there are plenty of other committees and opportunities in town. This town thrives on participation, engagement, volunteerism, and so we encourage anybody who was not selected tonight to please stay engaged and find a place where your talents can serve our wonderful town. So with that, do we now have a move to nominate?
Yeah, I think we should clarify for the active transportation, one of the positions is a regular position and the other is the alternate. So I'm assuming that the first choice person would be the regular and the other would be the alternate.
Would be the alternate, right? Okay.
How does that work since there were 3 positions and there's still one open?
I think that's the rest of the agenda. We leave the recruitment open for the unfilled term, I think. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And if anybody wants to step forward from the community, can they still do so?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it, we might want to open it to public comment. I don't know if
that's a good
anybody wants
idea.
to
Okay.
speak on behalf of anybody, but we at least should allow that and then go from there.
Okay, is there any public comment on this?
Could we meet the person if they're here?
I suppose so. I don't know that we can. Would you like to come up, Ms. Anderson?
Name, rank, and serial number.
Thank you for your votes. I would like to encourage anybody who's interested to apply for the soon-to-be-available Parks and Recreation Commission position, which I will be leaving vacant. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I mean, to start it off, if we want to talk about it, I'm very comfortable with the way the ranking came out, and I would move that we accept the rankings as they are. I don't know if you need to have separate motions for each, but I'd make the motion that we accept as the council has shown by the ranking system.
I'll second.
So a roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Councilmember Koberstein?
Yes.
Shuto?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Thank you, applicants.
Thank you very much. So now we will move on to item 10.2, and this is discussion and direction to staff concerning questions raised about city response to Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance, RSO, referendum, including 1, limits on city advocacy, 2, city community participation in mediation facilitation, 3, repeal of RSO, and/or 4, scheduling of election on RSO referendum. This is prepared by our attorney, Thomas Brown, and could you give us some more information, please?
Happy to, Mr. Mayor. So the staff report this evening attempted to respond to some of the direction and questions from the City Council at the January 8 meeting, where the Council undertook to address the referendum petition that had been filed and deemed to be sufficient to require the city to make a decision under the Elections Code. Questions were raised at the January 8 meeting. The questions really fell into the 6 categories outlined in the staff report, including timeline requirements, cost, budget issues, what rules apply to the mayor and council members with respect to advocacy for or against the referendum. 4, may the city engage a facilitator or mediator to facilitate or mediate discussions among stakeholders, given those advocacy rules, or under the Brown Act or other legal principles or limitations. 5, what rules apply with respect to requests of staff. And 6, once the council has placed the referendum on the ballot, may the measure be removed or pulled from the ballot if progress is made on a negotiated agreement through stakeholder mediation or facilitation. These questions really did respond to direction from the council at the meeting, and they weren't intended to foreclose other direction this evening, or other if the council's thinking as to what it wanted to do in response to the referendum petition had evolved. And so there were simply ways to address in kind of a broad brush manner some of these questions. As for timeline, the Elections Code really sets forth what the rules are. Once you are presented with a legally sufficient referendum petition, as the staff report says, you have 2 options. Either at the next regular municipal election, you can submit the ordinance to the voters in one of 2 ways. Either at the next regular municipal election occurring not less than 88 days after the order of the City Council calling the election, that would be November of 2020, or alternatively, the election could be called at a special election called for that purpose, again, not less than 88 days after the order of the council. The other option under the Elections Code for the council would be to for you to determine not to call an election, but rather to repeal the ordinance. You are faced with that every time you're presented with a referendum. The choice is for you either to repeal or call the election within the parameters set forth. At the January 8 meeting, there was a good deal of council discussion on timing, and I think it was several members expressed that waiting until the next general election seemed too long, and doing it in 3 months seemed too short. Again, I'm just reminding the council and the public of the conversation that did occur on January 8, not trying to foreclose any other council direction if the thinking has evolved. On cost and budget issues, the staff report contained information that we had received from the Napa County Registrar of Voters, John Tudor. I had a subsequent conversation with Mr. Tudor this afternoon, and he said essentially those numbers really aren't good anymore. The number that he's comfortable with is $30,000. The option really is in Napa County, as I understand it from Mr. Tudor, is that the elections in this county now are typically all mail. And so the only option for the city, as I understand it from Mr. Tudor, is whether there is a hand count or whether the machinery of the elections department is used to tabulate the votes. According to Mr. Tudor, the former is much less expensive. A hand count is much less expensive than involving the department's election counting machinery. So $30,000 would be that cost. The staff report did try to at least raise the possibility that if the council is still interested in some sort of a facilitation or mediation, there would be costs associated with that, staffing costs, and in addition to whatever the costs of a facilitator or a mediator might be. What are the rules? Number three, the third question, what are the rules that apply with respect to city involvement in advocacy, in advocating for or against the measure once it's on the ballot? Those rules are pretty well set forth. They follow from some case law that developed in California starting in the 1970s and continuing over the years since. The simple summary of that rule is that under the First Amendment, cities can't use their resources, whether that's money or staff time or their influence, to advocate for or against a ballot measure. That's deemed to do that is deemed to be a violation of the First Amendment. It also violates the Political Reform Act. So there are pitfalls associated with doing either of those. The rules are set forth in the staff report in a real broad-brushed way. I took those essentially from handouts that we've given over the years on a variety of different elections matters to city officials and city staff. They're fairly commonsensical in terms of not spending city money, not using city resources, not using city personnel to take an election-like advocacy position. But the things that you can do, and the case law has established this, is, for example, it's perfectly acceptable to conduct workshops. It's perfectly fine for the city council to, at a city council meeting, to actually vote to adopt a resolution for or against a measure. There can't be any advocacy besides that, and in that context. You also retain your First Amendment rights as council members and as do staff members to advocate for or against a measure on your own time, not using city resources or staff. And again, as I said, it's perfectly acceptable for the city to conduct educational workshops that are fair and balanced and don't advocate for or against the measure, but simply present the facts as to what the effects of the measure might be. I believe that sets forth that. I'm trying not to take up the entire council's time here. As for question 4, the question is, consistent with those advocacy rules, is there anything that would prevent the city council from engaging a mediator or a facilitator? The staff report concludes that the answer to that is no. The city council can do that, provided that the direction to the facilitator is to conduct the facilitation or mediation in a fair and impartial way that doesn't advocate one way or another. The same thing goes for directing that city staff be involved in that process. Perfectly fine as long as it's fair and balanced and neutral and doesn't take a pro or con position on the measure. With respect to the Brown Act, the same rules apply that govern us all the time. So if council is involved in that process, we do need to comply with the Brown Act's agenda and other public participation requirements during that facilitation. What rules apply with respect to requests of staff? That is really set forth in the advocacy part of the staff report. Again, staff can't be asked to take advocacy positions. So it's a kind of a simple summary of that. Question was raised, I think, in the context of the facilitation or the mediation, whether once the city council votes to place a measure on the ballot, and the facilitation or mediation was making progress and the stakeholders had agreed on some compromise, whether it would then be possible to remove the measure from the ballot. The short answer to that is the Elections Code doesn't allow that. The Election Code is fairly specific and limited in the circumstances under which a measure can be removed, and it can't be removed by a city council once it's been placed on the ballot. I think that's all that we were addressing in the staff report. I'm sure the council will have additional questions that I will try to answer this evening.
I have one question. Did any of the other numbers change in terms of the cost for the election? So the hand count went up from 25,000 to 30,000. Did anything else change?
No, that's when I talked to John Tudor this afternoon, he essentially said, and again, he was giving us his best estimate. I'm sure he would hate it if I were, trying to box him into that number. But he was saying that was assuming a hand count.
Okay.
That if it was a machine count, it would be more in the magnitude of $50,000.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to, in just a moment, open it up to public comment, but are there any other council questions or comments before we open it to the public? Okay. Well, I'm going to open up to public comment, and 4 minutes, please, per person. And if there's a few people, if you come and queue up behind, so we sort of make it an efficient line in waiting. So the public comment period is open. If there's anybody who has comment.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, staff. We are delighted, and I think I can speak for the entire Vineyard Valley community, that we will have a vote on this. My understanding is that there are 3 options. I think there was also the option of the primary, which would be a year from this March. Is that correct? You're shaking your head, yes?
Well, yes. So the options are calling the election to occur at the next regularly scheduled general municipal election, or any time that the city council wants to schedule a special election, the city council can call it, provided that it's no sooner than 88 days from the call of the election.
Right.
So there's an awful lot of flexibility built into the code for that.
So according to
the March 2020 election would be one of those dates that would be available for a special election.
I understand. Taken from the staff report and your correction, a special election would cost anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000. Okay.
Depending on the manner of the count.
Hand counts are system-wide. If it's for the primary, the cost would be approximately $10,000 to $15,000. That was from the staff report. Are there any changes on those numbers?
So Mr. Tudor did tell me that he thought that it would be less expensive to conduct it at the primary in March of 2020, less expensive than the $30,000.
And even less expensive at the general election. I've got an approximate cost of $7,500 to $12,000 for that from the staff report. And as I do the math, we have approximately 3,500 registered voters in Napa. If we spend $30,000 for those votes, that's over $100 a vote. As a thrifty taxpayer, I have some real concern about that. When we would, a year from now to do it at the primary, or a year from this fall at the general, would be the preference of myself and a lot of the people that I talk to in the park. although there's still an undercurrent of division in the park, it is calming over time, which things usually do over time. It's not over, and there's still some strongly held opinions about the ordinance. But it is calming, and for that reason, I don't see any urgency in calling the vote. The more time goes on, and I have something I want to offer during that time, I think the calmer and more rational and reasonable people become. I'm puzzled as to what you all mean by offering a mediation. Is that for half an ordinance? I don't know what we would be mediating on. Either we go ahead with the ordinance or we don't. What I would like to propose instead, that I came up with a good friend of mine today. We sat down and we're on opposite ends of the issue. But what we thought would really help our community would be to have a nonpartisan, fact-filled meeting facilitated by perhaps this woman that you have found very helpful, and I would be very happy to interview her to see if she would be willing to do something like that. It really doesn't involve the council. This is for our community. I don't think our fight is at this point is with the council. Okay, we have taken our lumps and moved on. But for our community, yes, that's needed. And having a good, skilled facilitator, I think, would be very helpful. Looks like I'm out of time.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that does it. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for your attention.
Good evening. My name's Robin McGuire, and I live at 4 Los Robles in Vineyard Valley. And I'm happy to follow my good friend. And she and I do disagree on the ordinance, and we are speaking about it, which is a great thing. And I hope that we can be an example to others in the park, that the tone can stay reasonable and we can remain friends. I would like to suggest another option, however, to the list of the options of a public vote that costs thousands of taxpayer dollars. An option that has always been available and has no associated costs. One that my good neighbors in Vineyard Valley may have overlooked. The reason I think my friends have overlooked it is because I do hear them opposing the ordinance with phrases such as, "We were forced into this," "We had no voice in this," "We were not asked." The democratic option to choose to participate or oppose is one of the unique features of the rent stabilization ordinance. City Council's ordinance makes it clear, it is written in no less than 4 times in the ordinance, that you do not need to participate, you do not need to agree, and no one is forcing the ordinance on you. It is an opt-in program. The ordinance is now, and has always been, an opt-in proposal. California Mobile Home Residency Law, Civil Code 798, already guarantees that if you sign a lease with more than 1 year, that lease is exempt from any rent stabilization ordinance and all of its parts. So go ahead and use your democratic option to sign an RSO lease at 1 year or not. It's always been available to us. In addition, the RSO is not applicable if your home in Vineyard Valley is not your primary residence. The St. Helena RSO cannot and does not overstep the California Mobile Home Residency Law. To verify this, I went back to the ordinance. The very first sentence of the ordinance, after the introduction and the definitions, read, "To the provision of this chapter shall apply to every mobile home park within the city, except it shall not apply to mobile home spaces which are subject to a written rental agreement that is more than 12 months in duration." This is the very first sentence of the ordinance. It is repeated once in all caps and 4 times in the ordinance, and it is a California law. We have always had a voice. We have always had a choice. Now, we may not agree with each and every detail of the ordinance, and we may continue to debate it, but we've always had the choice to sign the RSO lease at 1 year or a 7-year lease with our current landlord. For our neighbors who want a 1-year renewable indefinite lease at a maximum of 3% increase guaranteed for the life of their time in the park, and for their heirs, whether financial or for emotional reasons, who are we to deny their choice? The referendum takes that away. And the current lease in no way assures that your next lease will be at 3%. Let's be clear. The reason the city has to spend $30,000 is due to the referendum, not the ordinance. I would urge residents to vote by signing or not signing one or the other lease. If that doesn't come to pass, I would like City Council to vote for the soonest option so that we can put this behind us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Michael Merriman. I live at 4 La Cuesta Court in Vineyard Valley. I feel I need to clarify several points that have come up during the city's work to install space rent stabilization ordinances. Mrs. James, who previously spoke, has presented herself as the authorized representative of the majority of Vineyard Valley and a duly selected agent of the Homeowners Association. This is not possible. Until there is an actual vote, there can be no claim of majority ruling faction in any of this. Also, the Homeowners Association, as it was chartered originally by the McDonald family at the founding of the park, is only allowed to be a social organization, merely responsible for parties and social gatherings, and it has no political voice. Several years ago, there was a movement by residents to expand the scope of the homeowners charter and give it greater say and greater power, as one would find in most other homeowners associations. This effort was met with great resistance by Mr. McDonald at the time, who marshaled his cronies in the park to quash that effort through neighborly intimidation. Therefore, it must be noted that Mrs. James represents merely a voice of one. We all have one voice. She also seems to be stuck and unable to let go of the concept that the RSO needs to be eliminated because it came about through, and using her words, a flawed process. I agree that mistakes were made in rolling this idea forward, but the fact remains, process be damned, the ordinance has merit. She and her followers need to put aside this emotional hurdle that has no effect on the facts of the matter. She's worked tirelessly to torpedo the ordinance and lately to put it on the ballot in the hopes that it will fail in an election. The delay of an ordinance by delaying the vote to 2020 creates several other problems that I would like to make everyone aware of. I don't think that people realize that by delaying the vote, the tenants that she would hope to protect will be severely hindered in their ability to sell their home, should they ever need to do so or move into care and use that money for their own personal health care. That said, I strongly urge the council to put this up for a special election as soon as possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, I'd like to give you some reasons to support the rent stabilization ordinance. The annual increases are tied to a legally established metric. The St. Helena ordinance is based on 100% of the CPI for the Bay Area or 3%, whichever is lower. Vacancy control is a mechanism to govern the amount of increase in space rent when homes are sold. If the rent is increased every time a home is sold, plus the annual 3% increase, this will eventually cause all rents in Vineyard Valley to be so high that it will be hard to sell homes, and their value, what you can sell them for, will be lowered. The long-term effect of this practice could be that people who can afford second homes and pay higher rents will buy homes here. The City of St. Helena wrote this ordinance to stabilize the cost mobile home living and to try to prevent the middle-class income people from leaving St. Helena. This ordinance is written so that the owners will always receive a fair rate of return on their investment. If their expenses like major capital improvements must be made, they can appeal to the city to raise the rents. We have an investment in our homes that needs to be protected. We cannot move these homes to a different location without a great expense and great damage to the homes. The owners that we see and interact with are only representatives of an LLC of about 40 people. If they were vote to sell the park and we have no RSO, the results could be nothing less than disastrous. I see this ordinance as an insurance policy that it ensures us stable rents that we can count on. I would ask you that you would vote as soon as possible to hold a special election. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, and staff. My name is Pat Dell. I live at 25 San Juan Court, St. Helena. I want to bring up a couple points that perhaps haven't been brought up. And it's about, basically about the cost. I'm a thrifty taxpayer myself. But I think $30,000 to be spent as part of meeting the city's goal for stabilizing and preserving housing is not a lot of money. This is money being spent to meet a housing goal. I also would like you to consider the fact that Vineyard Valley is the only independent living development in St. Helena where people, when they want to downsize, people who live here can go. They can go to other places where they live in an apartment and their meals are fixed, that kind of thing. But here people get to maintain some of their independence and live in a community of people who are somewhat their same age, which is a very desirable thing. And I think that is a worthwhile thing for the city. I think it's definitely worth $30,000 to do it, and I would like to see you do it as quickly as it's illegal to do it. I see no reason to drag this out. I see a little bit of reduction in tension in Vineyard Valley, as Suzanne James said, but I see things like someone who responded to her announcement that she was asked to be the spokesperson, who's a member of the Vineyard Valley Board, totally doesn't understand this yet. And so I see total lack of understanding on the part of some people. And I think some of that lack of understanding comes from being emotionally upset so they can't understand. I can explain it to you, but I can't make you understand. And that's kind of the situation. So I would urge you to go forward with this. I would urge you to go forward with the $30,000. God bless Mr. Tudor. And to do it as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Unfortunately, everybody can only speak once. So what I suggest in terms of that is that we'll proceed with tonight's meeting, and then perhaps you can we can come up with some type of a public forum where we can more thoroughly take comment. But I think we open it at one time so thank you. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment. Thank you. And move it to the council discussion. Is there any comment or question at this point?
I have a question for our attorney, Mr. Brown, ma'am. So the earliest we can set an election is 88 days from today?
Well, no, it would be 88 days from the actual call. So the next step would be if the direction of the council is to, for example, set the election as early as possible. I think the math and my conversation with John Tudor suggests that June 4 would be the earliest date he could accommodate it. That would meet the 88 days. It would also allow us to meet the election code requirements with respect to publishing notice of the election, and also built into that time period is allowance for arguments for and against and so forth, and printing the ballot. So long-winded way of saying I believe that the answer is June 4 would be the earliest date we could get this on. He then said that he thinks this would be a relatively streamlined and I hate to say easy for him, but relatively easier election to process, such that he would be able to get you certified results roughly within a week. And the next step then would be to schedule a meeting, either a special meeting or a general meeting, where you would declare the results of the election based on the information from John.
Mayor Ellsworth, do you mind if I make a follow-up?
Well, please do.
So 3.5 months from now, $30,000 for a hand count, $50,000 for a machine count. 9 months further along, $10,000 to $15,000 for a machine count. A further 7 months along, which is the last possible moment the election could be called, 7,500 to 12,000. Is that an accurate summation?
As I said, the numbers from the time I wrote this staff report with these numbers until now, I didn't have a huge level of assurance from John that the numbers in the staff report are still, they're rock solid. But I do believe that they're a good estimate.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Mary?
Well, depending on what we're going to do, I would have some follow-up questions. But I do have some comments. I think it's very unfortunate that we were put in this referendum situation. When we passed this ordinance in November, we indicated it was going to roll out quite slowly, more than likely, and give people a chance to experience it and see how it worked, with a commitment to look at it probably in 2 years. We worked very hard to get a city fact sheet out, which would be required for everybody who was going to sign a lease. And unfortunately, before we could even do that, people were being paid to collect signatures to force a referendum. So I'm not any happier than anybody else about the position we're in, but I have not changed my mind. To me, the decision tonight is a matter of timing and cost. People who are indifferent to this ordinance or don't want to be a part of it don't have to be. And so for them, time is of no moment. It's not of the essence. They couldn't care if we don't vote for 5 years. On the other hand, there are people who would like to opt into this program. And every month or election cycle that we delay will prohibit those people from having the opportunity to do this. I think that's unfair. I think it's unfair for people who don't want to be a part of something to take away the right for people who truly want it, particularly when we agreed that we were going to roll it out and see how it worked and make adjustments if it wasn't performing the way we thought it was. As far as cost, it's irrelevant to me because there is a huge opportunity cost that you have to take into effect. We were presented with some information by the attorney for the property owner that in a 2-year period of time there had been 25 sales at Vineyard Valley. If you Grind that down to a year, it's 12. 12 turnovers. 12 chances where a person would have an opportunity to select a stabilized lease. If they don't have that opportunity, and if the leases were going up to market, as the owner said was his practice, they might be paying 200 more, 300 more than they would in a stabilized situation. You put let's just say 200. 12 people paying $200 more of ground rent a year, that's $24,000. I am as concerned, more concerned, about the inability of people to get into this program than I am about the cost to the city to hold an election, which we are being forced to try to do. This is not just about Vineyard Valley. Our housing issue, our housing problems are well documented. They affect, nobody is free from them. They affect homeowners, people who want to be homeowners who can't afford to live here. They affect renters who can't afford to pay the rents in town. They affect young families who can't buy houses and raise their children here. They affect singles and workers who want a place to live near where they work. They affect seniors. And this is the one place in town that is dedicated to senior living. And it is totally consistent with our housing policies that we adopt this ordinance. It was foreseen for many years. When somebody moves to Vineyard Valley from town, they free up a house in town that maybe somebody else can afford to move into. So this is not an isolated decision. This is part of our entire housing strategy. And if people believe in a housing strategy and trying to maintain a diverse community, I cannot see how you could not vote for this ordinance, because it does not impose a thing on one single tenant in Vineyard Valley. It merely gives them a choice. So my recommendation is going to be to schedule this as soon as we can.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just my concern with the cost comes from the idea that they got so many signatures so quick. So looking back on it, if this doesn't pass, how do we feel knowing that we went for the most expensive option? I mean, if the voters don't vote for it, like, you know, to me, I just think about that big number.
Well, people were paid to collect signatures, first of all. We don't know what they were telling people when they were getting signatures. The truth of the matter will come out at a vote. People will either vote it up or they'll vote it down. And to me, it's unknown how many people are going to lose an opportunity here, because the property owner never once shared a rent roll with us, never once told us when leases were expiring or how many people were on short-term leases. In fact, at one point, if he initially said, you don't need this because everybody's on a long-term lease. And then it turned out, at the first meeting I went to at Vineyard Valley, 10% of the people in Vineyard Valley didn't have a lease. And the next thing that happened was they got a letter telling them they ought to sign a lease because we were considering this ordinance. And huge litigation fees and costs were likely to be imposed on them alone. I think we have to forget about how we got here and get the true information out. I think for a housing cost consideration alone, it's worth the money.
Any other comment, Mr. Knudsen, Mr. Doring?
Just briefly, I think Ms. Robbins and Mary have summarized most of the points that I would make. I've made before. I'm fully supportive of this ordinance for the reasons stated by Mary. And one other comment I would add is that we need to be reminded that the city of St. Helena has a $32 million investment in this through flood control. We've basically created tremendous value for the owners preserve the community. We have an investment of $32 million. Now, all of that was paid by us, but much of that was paid by the taxpayers of the city of St. Helena. So when you compare that investment to the $30,000, no, I don't like to pay $30,000, but I think to preserve the housing, middle-class housing for our community, this is a critically important point for us, and I'm a proponent of democracy. The referendum was filed appropriately. Let's put it to a vote and see where it goes.
Okay, Mr. Knudsen. So my comments are, I believe that time is of the essence for those who may want to opt in. I believe that's a critical point. The education of the community would occur between now and the election. I would be concerned with putting off the election till next year, because this is still somewhat on the front burner for the community. To put it off a year, something fades from the radar and people have to get re-educated and everything start up from zero again. So I'm leaning towards wanting to see something happen, and I too believe in democracy and the referendum process, but I also believe that having the election as soon as possible is what I believe will best serve the situation. So that being said, I would support somebody making a motion. Is that where we are or do we discuss dates? How do we put that out there?
I think it would be helpful if we got direction from the council on all of the issues that we've raised, both at the January 8 meeting and this meeting. First, whether the council has any interest, and I haven't heard this at all, in repealing the ordinance. If that's not the case, and I understand it's not, then the question is whether we would need direction with respect to whether the council wanted to schedule this, as the Elections Code allows, at the next general municipal election, which would be November of 2020, or at some date as a special election, no less than 88 days from the call of the election. The action tonight will simply be direction to staff to prepare the documentation if the direction is proceed with calling a special election, and if the direction is also do it as early as possible, which I've heard interest on the council in that as one option, then we would undertake to then prepare the documentation with that direction. We would prepare the documentation, chiefly it would be a resolution calling the election, to bring back to you either at your meeting on February 26th or at a special election sometime before, a special meeting sometime before that. I think from my conversation with John Tudor today that bringing this back to you at your next regular meeting would work, provided that you adopted that resolution calling the election that evening. Because I believe that there is, according to John, we will have to do things the following day to meet the schedule, if also the council's direction and interest this evening is to call this at the first possible date in June, which would be June 4. We could also schedule it for June 18. When I say we, you could schedule it for June 18. That gives a little bit more room, a little more breathing space there to meet the deadlines of the Elections Code. I think the one more consideration for you all in picking the date is when would the if the voters decided to validate the RSO, to reject the referendum and approve the ordinance, when then would you be able to anticipate that the ordinance would become effective? The answer to that is not entirely clear to me from the Elections Code, but what I believe the best answer is that it's 10 days after the date that the City Council takes John Tudor's certification results and declares those results. So following the election, you would then have an item brought back to you, presumably very quickly after the election. John, again, said that he thought he'd be able to turn that around within roughly a week. And so if time is of the essence, that 10-day waiting period is the one that I believe applies under the Elections Code. You would have to anticipate that there would be a 10-day period to wait before the RSA would become effective after the date that you declare the result of the election. That's the direction I think that staff would appreciate from the council this evening.
Okay, and then the items in terms of mediation or that sort of thing. So if we focus first on the date, and let's discuss that and maybe give that direction and then look at the other items if we need to. So do we have any?
But if we choose the date, we can no longer do the mediation or facilitation.
You can do the mediation, but the question I think I would want to know more about is, and I haven't talked to any council members about this concept, would be what would you hope to accomplish with a mediation once you've already made the decision to put the referendum on the ballot, because we know that you can't pull it off. And so my question to you would be even if the mediation were successful, what could you do at that point? You'd still end up having to go forward with the election. Mm-hmm. But you certainly can always do a facilitation. And I should also say, too, that the rules of advocacy, the rules that I was describing with respect to limitations on how you can advocate, for or against any ballot measure, those are much less stringent before you actually call the election. So I know a lot of this is academic, and I don't want to go on too much about it, but if you were to wait to call the election to pursue a mediation or facilitation, that gives you more latitude because you don't actually have a measure on the ballot to advocate for or against.
And I think, go ahead. No, just the idea of mediation or facilitation was to get to a place that it wasn't a winner or a loser. There was somewhere where we were incorporating some ideas to have compromise. So that was the idea. That was one. And then the other was the facilitator came out as an idea of, since we heard that the process rolled out in a way that created some harm to the community, could we, from the bare minimum, offer a recommendation of somebody that we knew that could help them? Or is that something that the city, when we're either doing this communication or future communication, can we look at what can we do so that we're able to keep it factual and both sides get to have their opinions out there without the damage that's done to the relationships?
From a legal perspective, there's nothing that would prevent you from doing that. Again, once you've placed the measure on the ballot, you have to make sure that the city's role is one of a neutral arbiter and that the process remains fair, at least from the city's involvement, fair and impartial. But there's nothing, and again, to the extent council members are involved in that process as well, we would also need to satisfy Brown Act requirements. But aside from that, there's nothing that would prevent you as a council from committing the city and the city's resources to some kind of a mediation to restore community stakeholder, faith in the process, something along those lines.
So if we were to proceed with giving direction to call the election with the additional direction to create some sort of a facilitated meeting, whether it's educational or to heal a divide, does that sound like we're going in the right direction? If we are going to call for an election tonight, then the secondary direction would be to create some sort of a meeting. Mr. Dorian, do you have any?
One of the concerns well, first of all, let me speak. I've been through probably 100, 150 mediations in my career. I count back. There are some processes, particularly political processes, that don't lend themselves very well to a mediation. But I think that we can always talk about this and heal the divide. The biggest concern I have is that the most important party that would participate in a mediation is not here to call for the mediation, has not indicated any interest in the mediation, and that would be the owner of the park. And so unless I would divorce the two, I would keep that option open as we move forward. We can always talk, we can lend any resources that we have that are within the law. I think that's good for the community. I would love to be a part of that and happy to help in that regard. But I think I want to focus on the date and the election itself, but keep that option open, and particularly get the parties can do whatever they want to do, frankly, without the city. But if we can be of assistance to help that process, even mediation, the word mediation probably is not the right word, but some kind of discussion would be something that we can always participate in later.
Okay. So if, do you have a?
I just wanted to follow up on that. I'm leery of mediation. I'm leery of taking a step that somebody is going to claim is some violation of our ethical obligations. I'm very much in favor of the city getting out a factual sheet to help people understand the ordinance and to help people in Vineyard Valley who still don't understand it, understand the ordinance. And I think that that's where we should put our efforts, consistent with your fair and reasonable, and I assume you're the arbiter of what's fair and reasonable in the end. We're very close to having a big factual sheet, and it shouldn't be that difficult to boil it down into something that people can focus on and take information out of. I always understood mediation to be sort of not to mediate what the ordinance was going to be, but to help the community come back together. And some of that is already happening, but as Paul said, we crafted the best ordinance we could based on the objections of ownership and the interests of the parties.
So, excuse me, Mayor Ellsworth. So, given that 13 months is too long, is June 4th the right date?
I think it is. I don't know for a fact, but from all the discussions we've had, I've been led to believe that July 1 is a date when many leases may expire. And I think it's very important that if that is the case, that those people have the opportunity to be offered a one-year lease, which ownership would be required to do if we vote in early June and the votes are counted and 10 days pass. If we go too far beyond that, there goes July, which could be a very significant date.
And a final question. There have been June ballots before occasionally in the county of Napa. Is there a possibility that there may be other government entities that may be scheduling a early June date, which might actually allow for some efficiency from the voting office?
We're not aware of any other jurisdictions with a June date.
I will say again that in my conversation with Mr. Tudor today, he didn't feel that this election would be particularly difficult or daunting for his office. And he's already floated it, among his staff, and they're all ready to do whatever they're called on to do, depending on your direction this evening.
So I would support looking at the earliest possible date, which is, as we said, June 4th. June 4th. I'm hoping, I'm asking to see, I believe we have consensus on that. Am I correct in that?
I'm supportive of that also.
Okay, so it looks like that's the direction to.
Well, we have to vote, I think, don't we?
Pardon?
Direction, but do you need a vote?
Do you need a vote? I think we should. I think we should.
I think from a staff's perspective, I think we feel we have the council's direction, unless any of you feel that your voice wasn't heard. But I think we've understood now that the direction is to do whatever we need to do to make a June 4 special election happen.
Yes, okay. And then what I'll say to the public is we're here to receive comment from email or, and as we said, separate from this, we will be looking at what can be done for continued discussion. We want to make sure that we're hearing people's opinions and what folks have to say. So with that, Tom, I think you have the direction. Okay, very good. And so thank you. And we will now move on to the next item.
Before we move on, I had a point of clarification on the new business 10.1, the voting for the Planning Commission applicant. I may have usurped my power and authority by making a motion when that motion is typically under the authority of the mayor, and I want to make sure that that vote is a legitimate vote, or does the mayor have to make that vote under our code of conduct and state law? Because I don't want to have that pop back up sometime in the future, and I apologize for having a brain freeze on that.
The question's a good one. The direction on the agenda for the evening anticipated that and recognized that under state law and under the city's municipal code as well, the process is such that the mayor makes the recommendation subject to the approval of the full council, and the law would deem that was the action you took this evening, given that was the staff report recommendation and the action contemplated on the agenda. Did that answer the question?
I just want to respect the mayor's position and authority that he has the ultimate power to make that motion with the council consent, and so I wanted to make sure that's clear.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, you think we're okay?
Yes, and because that was the staff recommendation. And that was the action contemplated under the agenda.
Okay.
No, I understand what you're, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to digress. I just want to make sure. Thank you.
And then one further item on this election. I hope the direction as well is that we'd be happy with the hand count. Is that, we should give don't pursue this electronic.
We will bring that back with the resolution we bring back to the city council, whether it's at a special meeting before the 26th or on the 26th. That resolution will specify hand count. John Tudor was explicit today saying that he wanted that in the resolution to try and keep the cost down.
And the costs are by law from the general fund, or could they be from another fund like an affordable housing trust fund or anything like that? It would be kind of a stretch maybe, but general fund? Or at least we can look into it.
I think it's more of a city manager response than a city attorney, but I don't know the answer from a legal perspective whether any other restricted fund could be used. I think the manager was anticipating that the general fund would pay, but if it's council interest in exploring other funds to pay this from, I think I can look into that from a legal perspective.
That'd be fine. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on now to 10.3. This is consideration and proposed approval of first reading of an ordinance adding sections 13.04.215 and 13.12.120 to St. Helena Municipal Code. To refer to the Planning Commission for its review and recommendation on the ordinance amending section 17.08.060, and 3, approve the resolution designating a city council subcommittee to review otherwise confidential water customer water usage data. And this is also Tom Brown, city
I'll
attorney.
recuse myself again.
Oh, okay.
To be consistent, it's the same time.
Maybe we should wait for Paul to come back.
Yeah. I think he's just stretching his legs there.
Sorry about this hacking.
So we have we've been addressing this as a staff report sets forth at several different council meetings over the past roughly 6 months. To refresh the council's and the public's recollection, this issue really came about as a result of comments made and suggestions made by members of the public. Anthony McKelly and others had suggested that there was a strong community interest. Initially, it was framed as in determining whether project applicants who had made representations during their project approval process whether they were actually in compliance with with the promises they were making in the process of getting a city land use entitlement. In addition, the community process, members of the community also expressed interest, as did council members, in finding a way to have independent city council eyes verifying whether users under city water agreements were in fact complying with their water agreements, with the limits imposed under these water agreements and the terms and conditions. The problem with both of those initially was that under state law, water customers or any utility customers' usage data is deemed to be confidential. There are means under the Public Records Act and otherwise whereby the city council can make a decision to remove that confidentiality and, depending on the circumstances, provide for either a complete lifting of the confidentiality of the water usage data, or to create a process that we've discussed that would be more limited, allowing council members in a subcommittee context to provide those independent elected official eyes to review initially water use of the large water contract users and the water use by those businesses or persons who had made representations during their land use entitlement process. As the process evolved, and we, as the staff report says, we came back to the council with draft ordinances that initially the council approved by a first reading. We came back for a second reading, and council members expressed some interest in seeing whether making a couple changes to the draft that the city council had approved by a first reading. One of those changes was to create an explicit provision in the ordinances that said if the independent review of a water use of a customer water use pursuant to a water use agreement or pursuant to a land use entitlement showed that in fact there had been noncompliance, that it would be important for that information to then become non-confidential, for that information to be made public. In addition, Councilmember Koberstein raised the concern or the interest in having the ordinance broadened such that there was at least the potential to allow council members to do a broader review of not just water usage data for those users under water agreements, but all large users in the city. So we undertook to make additional changes to the ordinance to address both of those suggestions. And as I said in the staff report, and I've pointed out at the previous meeting, doing that will require a new first reading because it's more than just a ministerial or a secretarial kind of a change to the ordinance, which is the kind of change you can make in between readings. So that's where we are this evening. We brought back these ordinances revised to address the concerns and the suggestions made by council members at the previous meetings for a new first reading by the city council. If you all are satisfied that the ordinance is capturing what your interests are, and then in addition, as I've said before, the ordinance that amends title that creates changes in Title 13. Those are essentially your water regulations of the municipal code, was always intended to be a companion ordinance to another ordinance that would amend your zoning ordinance, Title 17. The reason we separated those was that any changes, any amendments to your zoning ordinance require some additional process. Those amendments need to go to your planning commission first for the planning commission's recommendation, and then those would come back to you for first reading. We brought that to you as well this evening for your direction. Again, if you're satisfied with that draft roughly captures your interests, that then the direction would be to for Mr. Hausch to take that down to the Planning Commission for its comments and recommendations, and then to be brought back to you after review by the Planning Commission. And then finally, we created the resolution that would formally create the council subcommittee, and you would designate 2 council members to that committee to actually do this work in reviewing the water usage data. And those are the 3 decisions before you with this item. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any thoughts from the council? I'll open it to the public for public comment. Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and come back to the council.
I just have one question about the subcommittee. That's something that from time to time we can appoint or select new people. We don't have to do that by resolution all the time. How do we?
Well, it's a Brown Act issue, and what I was always trying to do here was not have this turn into a Brown Act permanent committee. If it's a standing committee, then it is subject to the Brown Act, even if it's only 2 members. And my understanding was we didn't want to operate within those constraints. The way to do that is to have this be what they call an ad hoc committee. It's very limited term. It's not an ongoing committee that's going to exist forever. It's going to exist for a specific task for a limited period of time. That's the only way that it doesn't have to comply with the Brown Act. And so anyway, that was...
So once the ordinance is effective, we could decide at a meeting who's going to be the ad hoc committee?
You could wait and do that, or you could give that direction and adopt that. I drafted that resolution so that it would not become effective until the ordinance became effective.
Okay.
But you can wait, certainly, as well, and we would bring it back.
But waiting on that would not necessarily slow the process of this coming back.
No, it wouldn't. It does require another agenda item, another staff report, some more process that we're happy to do, of course. But if you want to streamline it, you could get it done this evening.
Good. Okay. Mr. Knudsen, any thoughts?
Just a brief one. I'm all for streamlining.
I'm satisfied with the changes that have been made and offered, and so I would move to accept the recommended action on all 3 of these points.
Second.
Just a moment. Sorry, I lost my...
The only sort of nuance here is do we need to choose 2 people now in conjunction with the motion?
You don't need to. It would be more streamlined.
I think I'm all in favor of streamlining, so maybe we should insert those 2 people.
So with that, choosing the people, Mr. Doring and myself have been on this for a while. I would like to continue on this. I don't know where Mr. Doring stands, and I'd like to get the council direction or thoughts on it as well.
It makes sense to me for the two of you to continue, because you were given a number of little tasks related to water agreements and the like.
We do need to, just apropos of the point that we were just discussing, is this is not an ongoing committee. This is a limited task committee. And so this is, to some extent, I think it makes sense for this, even though they overlap in the tasks to some extent. I think you want to be clear analytically or conceptually that this is a different subcommittee.
Gotcha. Okay. I see
And the
what
other
you're
one
saying.
is actually, I think we're calling it a working group.
Or a council liaison.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the idea, though, of having the same two who have familiarity and understanding compared to the rest of us.
I agree.
Okay.
I'm not sure I offer much, but I'd be happy to continue to serve.
You offer a tremendous amount, sir.
Since it's ad hoc, you're, yes, that's a beginning.
So I make that motion with those two appointments to this committee.
Okay, I'll second it again.
And just as a clarification to so that we try and keep out of Brown Act trouble, I think Mark and I will make a point of sort of keeping track of the timing of this, and we'll bring it back and such that this committee can report back relatively promptly to the extent that's, the committee's findings deem that reporting back to be appropriate.
Okay, so thank you. And so the roll call?
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
Councilmember Koberstein?
Yes.
Knudsen?
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. He's going to get Ms. Chateau. So I'll wait for her to come in before we start on our next.
Mr. Ellsworth, could we take a bathroom break?
Yes, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 7:47. who is more? No, I think we're good. I think we've got everybody here. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, we will come back to order here. We'll move on to item 10.4, and this is City Council discussion and direction regarding update of City Council Policy P-F1-0005, leak adjustment policy to commercial properties, and this is prepared by Finance Director April Mitz.
Thank you. I'll just wait for the PowerPoint to come up. My very brief PowerPoint. Yeah, I have one even shorter later on tonight, just so you know, I can do it. So again, the header, I have to put this in there. So forward to the next slide. So just a really quick background, on January 22nd, the City Council did direct staff to look at different various policies allowing leak adjustments to commercial properties, since our current policy right now only applies to residential. Based off of staff direction or council direction, staff did research 11 public agencies, which was also provided at the last council meeting. And staff compared specifically the following, and this is what we're looking for City Council direction, and if there's anything else, any other adjustments to our current policy they would like to make. The first is the calculation method for the leak adjustments. The second is the frequency of the adjustments. The number of billing cycles. A billing cycle currently is 1 month, and so we're looking for council direction if they want to change that. The maximum a credit allowed, and then also if for commercial properties, you would allow a credit for both the water and the wastewater system. For residential properties, it only allows a bill credit for the water system and not the wastewater, since wastewater is billed on your month or your winter average. So the next and final slide. So this is just a policy, just a summary of the other agencies for the 5 different areas that we're looking for direction. So the calculation method for the credit, currently St. Helena for the residential, we provide 50% of the excess of the credit. The summary from other commercial leak adjustment policies, it did range from 22% to 100%. And the majority of them did give credit for 50% of the excess, so very similar to the policy we currently have in place. The frequency in which they can apply, currently St. Helena's policy is once every 5 years or once every 60 months. You can actually apply for a credit. Looking at other agencies, they did range from no limit as long as it's for a different incident. For instance, if you had a pipe burst, a pool leak, as long as you didn't have the same leak adjustment over and over again. And it also ranged anywhere from once every 1 to 2 to 3 and even as long as 10 years. The majority did give an adjustment once every 2 years. For the number of consecutive billing cycles, or for us it's the number of months, currently we do 1 month only, so it's just one of our current billing cycles. From the survey we did at the other agencies, it did range from 1 to 3 billing cycles or 1 to 3 months, with the majority giving adjustments for 2 consecutive months or 2 consecutive billing cycles. The maximum credit, we do not have a limit on the maximum credit that we have. However, in our adopted budget, we do have a maximum amount in our adopted budget of $60,000, but that's for CARES and also the leak adjustment policy. For credits, only 3 agencies allowed for a maximum credit to be given. The maximum ranged from $200 to $800, with one agency limiting the maximum sewer credit for residential to 18 units. So one agency just did it by units, and the other ones actually did allow for a maximum bill credit. And then for commercial leak adjustments for water and sewer, currently we do not have it for commercial. And then for the agencies we surveyed, 9 of the agencies allowed for leak adjustment credits for commercial for sewer only. And out of the 9, 3 stipulate that a credit is given if the leak occurred outdoors and the excess water did not go into the sewer system. So that would be more of your irrigation where the water didn't go into the sewer system and go through the treatment plant process. So based on that information, we are seeking council direction for those 5 different policy issues as they would apply to commercial. And if you'd like to also adjust anything for the residential, why we're updating the policy. And it is staff's intention, if we have clear direction tonight, we can bring this policy back at the next council meeting on February 26th.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from council initially?
I have a question, if you don't mind. Ms. Mitz, is it in the summary, there are no other water providers, utilities that do not have commercial credit?
That is correct. We are the only one that does not have a
Thank
commercial credit.
I'm going to open it up to public comment if there is any.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. I just did have one question, point of clarification. On the billing cycle, is it clear whether or not these different agencies have a billing cycle of 1 month or 2 month? So when we're talking about a billing cycle, you know, a lot of cities and counties have a 2-month water billing cycle, but here in St. Helena, ours is a 1 month. Do we have any information on what exactly their billing cycles were?
I do not have that information in front of me. It's something I can definitely bring back to council as far as what they consider a billing cycle.
I would just ask that we keep that in mind as we're setting forth the policy as to, you know, what exactly is a billing cycle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other public comment, I will close the public comment. And any thoughts initially from council?
It seems like our policy should be identical to me for clarification, you know, for ease of implementation, sort of whatever residential, it seems like commercial should be the same.
Except in this case, the water was going right into the sewer. The leak was
right,
and the most of the bill increase was on the wastewater side.
So I'm trying to take it away from the specific case, just
Right.
sort of general principles. So perhaps that is an exemption or unique situation for commercial that would be if the water is simply such a weird. You know, it's funny. The whole reason this is coming up is become an extremely strange commercial situation, which we didn't really get any. I was hoping we might get some clarification as well regarding the landlord versus the tenant, and at any rate, but we're not really addressing that in this meeting, honestly.
Well, the staff did recommend that we establish a cap, but maybe we could have some wiggle room that losses above a certain amount could be approved on a case-by-case basis, and maybe wastewater could be on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I'm inclined to make sure we have a cap and not look at these individual circumstances. I'm more concerned about everybody and sort of the incentives there, obviously. But with a caveat that if there's a unique circumstance, and you know I hate to say that, but there is a unique circumstance there that the council would be able to hear that owner out, because I think it would be, first of all, get the cap for most people's circumstances, but then you have these anomalies that pop up which are just different, that we should have an opportunity to go, yeah, we have some equity issues here and we need to deal with that. I'm okay with, you know, going over a 2-month period and looking at months rather than billing cycle. If it goes over 2 months, to include both those months, because you're capturing the end of 1 month and maybe another month. I think that's fair.
When there are unique circumstances, I agree with you, Vice Mayor Doring, that having an appeal process is really good. I also wonder if, in sort of unique circumstances like this, if there's any incentive, or could there be something where we actually ask for a fix so that this sort of things, these
Your
sort of
time
things.
is cut off.
Yeah. I'm talking too much. That these sort of things. I mean, this is such an odd, so appeal to council, right? But it's so odd. I wonder if there's something that we can mandate saying, fix the problem so that we don't ever see this again.
Well, Mary had a great idea that I talked to Mark, said that we could do where when somebody does have a problem, we ask that they put on a sensor so that they're alerted when something happens in the future. I like that idea, as long as it's not cost prohibitive.
So we've done some additional research on that, and I'm going to ask Felix to comment on this, and I guess I would summarize that we're not as enthusiastic about the alternatives at the moment.
So the current configuration is such that the meters can be retrofitted to do that, although it would require additional infrastructure to collect the data. So either cellular or data collectors throughout the city that would then transmit that data to City Hall, presumably to finance or to billing, so we could track that, and eventually customers would be able to log in and see their usage, set alarms. As for instance, they could say, if I use 500 gallons, send me a text message. But it does require infrastructure. It's something that we are moving towards. We have we've already done some propagation studies with radios, and we intend to bring that to council in the next few months. So it's not something that's available right now. We would have, like I said, we have to add infrastructure, and it does require some capital to do. So in the interim, Public Works staff can look at some other devices that may be more cost effective for a customer just in the interim, and that would be a little more robust than some things that have been suggested in the past. But it's possible. It's going to take infrastructure and capital.
The other point is this is really rare that this happens. So I just wanted to keep that in mind.
An automatic flow limiter. You use 5,000 gallons. I'm not serious about that, but
It may be more frequent than you can imagine as soon as we adopt the policy that allows for it. Going back to the 1 billing cycle or 2 billing cycle, in thinking about that may be something that we keep it at 1 billing cycle, but that is a unique circumstance that crosses over so many days into 2 billing cycles, and that would be something that we would be able to weigh in on, depending on what the facts are. It's going to be so fact dependent, frankly. The other two other items that I thought would be appropriate, and I didn't see them. Maybe I stand corrected if they're in the policy. I will be. Is that there should be a limitation on the number of days that pass from the receipt of the bill, or maybe the issuance of the bill, to the time that somebody can make the claim for the reimbursement. And I would suggest 10 days, maybe, or 15 days, and not just have it months later, potentially years later. And the other part of the policy, I think, that needs to be adjusted, and I would say for both residential and commercial, that there should be a timeline. We have language in there that says, there's a caveat in there that says, if the water user, or the applicant or whatever, receives some kind of insurance proceeds, that we have a right to ask for that. I would actually expand that. I would say that if the applicant or the user receives any kind of reimbursement from any source, that we would have an opportunity to seek reimbursement. And I don't think, first of all, given my review of insurance policies, it's very rare that an insurance company is going to reimburse for that. But there may be other situations where there could be reimbursement from other sources, including landlords or other co-tenants or what have you, that we should have a right to receive that reimbursement back. So I would expand it beyond insurance.
The reason I thought we needed 2 months was because they weren't aware of the problem until the first month was almost over, and they weren't able to fix it until going into the second.
I don't dispute that. I think that's a unique circumstance that I'd certainly find to be made in good faith. I don't even want to go down that path. I think that's the next step, but I'm just focusing on this. I'm really looking at all of the potential applicants that come before us we need, that one probably will come before us again, frankly. But we have to set the parameters here. And I agree that, there was a reason for it to go over 2 months, and I think that should at least be weighed by the city council and not be automatic.
So I should have asked it in a question. Is that the norm, that you wouldn't know for the first month until you got the bill about the leak?
Yes, typically that's the reason. That's going to be the case. And what we do is we read meters once a month, and when we read, there's an analytics that tells us whether or not there's excess water usage over a 20 or continuous water usage over a 24-hour period, which prompts us to notify the property owner that we anticipate there's something wrong. There is a nuance to this every other billing or the billing cycle issue, and that is at your next council meeting, I'm anticipating bringing you a report that would encourage you to consider transitioning back to a prior process of billing every other month. So the bills still cost the same amount of money, we just do it half of the time. Now, we've had to think through the implementation side of this, and we recognize that because of the current technology, which is we don't know you have a leak until we drive by and we capture a reading, we would continue that practice of driving by monthly. So we'll still know monthly whether or not there's been some period of continuous water usage for 24 hours such that we can notify a property owner, but they wouldn't receive the bill necessarily every month. It would be every other month. And so that's a bit of a wrinkle that complicates this discussion a bit. And of course, it's a recommendation, and we'll talk to you about the advantages and also, the trade-offs at the next meeting in the context of attempting to free up staff time in the Public Works Department that's more productive than hanging door hangers on doors, and also the corresponding telephone calls that are encountered by our Finance Department on a monthly basis.
So that'll be coming at the next council meeting, and so that may inform a little bit how we lay this out. One of the, Mr. Doring had thought, and I just want to bring up this, is a 10-day period from when you notice. I just think of people who are traveling or away. Is 30 days too long? And I get your point of somebody showing up a couple months later or a year later, but is saying 30 days out from the billing if there's a problem? What are your thoughts?
Can reach a compromise. Again, I'm looking at the overall situation and the finances of the city and not one particular. Somebody could come to me and say, look, council, I was gone for 6 months. Somehow, the bills were not reviewed by somebody who was in charge of reviewing the bills. It could happen, I guess. Maybe that would be a unique circumstance that we would want to do on a case-by-case basis. I'd rather set really fairly strict parameters based on policy, but with the caveat that we could look at special circumstances. So those are my thoughts.
Our current policy does say submit within 30 days to submit the leak adjustment or the leak adjustment application. So currently it does say within 30 days. We can definitely look at modifying. Another alternative is if when our leak alarm is triggered, basically 24 hours of continuous usage, we do send out leak letters. So in addition to the bill, if there's 24 hours of continuous usage, they do get a leak notification. We can always incorporate that within 30 days of the bill or the leak notice.
Well, I've gotten, I would like this to be keyed to actually getting the bill and seeing the dollar amount. We happen to have a swimming pool. Once in a while, there's a little mechanism that goes on to top off the water or whatever it's doing. And I've gotten a couple of these, water's running for 24 hours and it's really nothing. By the time the bill comes, it was not a significant amount. And I would hate people to start calling the plumber, investigating what's going on because they think there's something, of big magnitude happening, and it might not be at all. I think it is good to send the letter. People would start to look around, but I think your time to apply should be from when you get the bill.
And the other thing is, it would put the burden on the city then that, well, I didn't get the leak notification. And I mean, a bill is a bill is a bill. Everybody knows they have to pay them. There's something really concrete about it that I like. And the other thing I just want to keep in mind, well, for council's consideration, I mean, this is not city infrastructure. This is residents who have a problem with their own plumbing, presumably, or commercial entities. And so it's not, I mean, and we're, yes, for people in extraordinary circumstances, lovely to help out. But that means we're all collectively helping them out. I mean, it's essentially the city is doing an insurance policy for individual problems where you have a pipe that's broken. We're all basically reinsuring those individuals and saying, look, your bill's not going to be terrible, because we're all paying for it. So.
I guess I'm sorry. No. I guess one question that I have for staff is, what is the trigger to get it to the city council? Who makes that decision that, oh, this is beyond my pay grade and this has to go to the city council? It's kind of wide open there, the special circumstances. I'm happy to give you all the authority in the world to say no. But how do we manage that issue?
Vice Mayor Doring, there's a maximum, and if it's over the maximum and they wish to appeal it, then there's an appeal process? Is that possibly a way to play that out?
But if the appeal, the cost of the appeal, I guess would have to be brought into that. If this is a standard appeal in the city, what cost is that?
I think we'd be looking for some.
Yeah.
We'd be looking for some specific direction with this policy. So whatever the number is that moves you to the city council for consideration, you would pick a number, whether it's 10,000 or 20,000 or some number.
We're talking about a fee to appeal, right? Like $15 or $35.
I wouldn't anticipate that we would need a fee. It would
Okay.
just be a matter of we'd put together a staff report and bring it to you.
And it sounds like the other agencies that have done a maximum have done it based on a dollar value rather than a flow. Is that correct, Ms. Mitz?
That is correct. I only found one that actually based it on flow, and the rest were maximum dollar amounts. I can tell you just on the residential side, we've had some leaks that definitely are well beyond that. Most notable was a pool leak that had an autofill that didn't realize it until they actually got the bill, and it was a very high bill. So what I would, if I so can just make a suggestion, maybe what we can do is go down through the list, because I think some of them might be a little more clear cut and dry than the others. And so at least we can work our way down the list and get council's direction on those items. And then if we need to bring other items back for consideration, or if there's any more research that council's directing, we can do that.
That sounds good.
Okay, so if we can start with a calculation method for credit, currently we do 50% of excess water usage based on the 3-year average. And that was definitely the consensus with the other agencies that we surveyed. So if we can get council direction on the excess.
I'm in favor of that, staying with that. For both.
Okay, and then currently the frequency in which they can apply is once every 5 years. And I would like to see, basically seeing the information from the other cities, I wanted to be able to give council the option if they'd like to change that, if they'd like to increase it, lower it, and give any other parameters to staff.
5 years sounds fine to me.
I was thinking 2, just looking at when I did the math, where it would be in the middle.
Personally, I like 5 as well. I mean, and I'll tell you why, Ms. Chateau, just because it really, if you are continually coming back with a problem, you've got a problem, not the city, right? Mm. It's your problem. Improve your plumbing or something, right? Is that too hard-nosed?
Yeah. My thought is if the majority doing it every 2 years, and if we're looking at 5, for me, looking at 3 or 4 would be somewhere in the middle. That's my thought.
Can somebody tell me how many of these we have a year under the residential program? How frequently does this happen?
I would, you know what, if I can look up our last quarterly staff report to city council, because it gives the number of leaks that are in there. Let me look it up real fast.
Is it like one a month, or?
I know we get more than one a month. I would say.
On the residential side, there's
residential
many more meters.
I would say on average maybe 10 to 15.
A month?
Oh, no, for the quarter, so it's about 5 a month. My apologies. I was thinking the quarterly basis.
And so with residential, it's every 5 years, somebody can come in.
And fair to say, we have probably approximately 5 times more residential accounts than commercial accounts?
That is correct.
Ballpark.
And this was actually the first request that we've gotten for a commercial account. I did receive one the other day and just let them know that this item was coming before council, but since we instated this policy and I've been here, I've only received the one from Pizzeria Trevigny, then the recent inquiry.
Do you want to stick with the 5? Should we start with that? What do you think?
I think the owner's sending out letters to his fellow commercial establishments. I'm really comfortable with a 5, but I can go down. I mean, I just think we want to discourage these kinds of things.
Mary?
Frankly.
You know, I'd be inclined to go with 5, but maybe this could be one of these things that is subject to modification if something really crazy happens. Yeah, an appeal of some kind.
Does that sound, if there's some anomaly, there's some process?
Great.
Okay. So if that's consistent with our residential, the 5. So, we good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
So next on to consecutive billing cycles. Currently, our billing cycle is a 1-month period, but as Mark stated, there is going to be a recommendation that we go to an every other month billing, so a 2-month billing cycle. And so I'd like to get council direction.
Well, my thought is that what they experienced was that they didn't know till after the first month. So to me, two months or 2 billing cycles, giving you the ability to act. But if we're changing the billing cycle and you're checking once a month anyway, it would seem to me that it would be one billing. If we change to the 2-month period, it'd be 1 2-month billing cycle because we're checking it halfway through. But
I think we should get rid of the word cycle.
It's probably
I think
easier.
it should be keyed into receipt of the bill somehow, since the cycle's going to change.
And think of it as months, I think, is maybe an easier way to talk about it today.
Okay.
So then I would say 2 months.
So if the
You're getting
billing
more
cycle-
conservative
so-
as we move on.
So is it if the billing cycle is 1 month, 2 billing two bills? If the billing cycle is 2 months, 1 bill? Because Ms. Koberstein, didn't you say make it keyed to the bill?
Yeah, I should think that once you see the bill and you see some astronomical thing, you would take some action immediately. In this case, which again, I mean, we have to have a right of appeal. It was very difficult to find where the leak was, and it went on and got quite expensive. And that to me is a special case. But I would just key it to the receipt of the bill because the cycle is going to change.
So two if 1 and 1 if 2? Or
it.
just 1, regardless of the billing cycle?
I'd say 1.
1 billing cycle.
It would be
okay.
helpful for us to, if you think in
Months.
terms of months, because you may not make the policy decision later. So
I hear
1 month
2,
or
I
2
hear 1.
months.
But 2 months, except for it's got to be upon receipt, like the 10-day or 30-day or 20-day or hopefully 10-day. It should be based off, you know, the bill is done, you get it in the mail, or you get it electronically, or whatever people do. Do we send bills electronically, or is it mostly mail?
They are sent electronically if people opt into it electronic, otherwise it's via mail.
Do we need to wait on this one to have that other discussion to?
No.
No? Okay.
I'm okay with 1 month.
What the granting is, how many consecutive billing months you can receive a credit. So if we are going by, even if we change to every other month billing, but we're still driving by monthly to verify the leaks, we should be able to divide the bill up where we can do it where we can figure out one month to 1 month. I'll have to think about that one.
Now I'm confused. Are you talking about the credit back to the customer and how many months it goes over, as opposed to the customer is going to get credit for 1 month of excess, and it's a matter of how many months you apply the credit?
Correct.
So there should be a way of knowing every month where they're over, because we're checking it every month regardless. And so there's a notification. So if they're notified and they can raise the alarm within 10 to 30 days, then they get the credit for 1 month of overage.
That would be correct. It'd be for 50% of the excess for that 1 month period.
Okay, so if they're not, but that would require them reviewing the bill right away when they get it, so that they're not getting into a second month of usage.
And if we're in a scenario where it's mid-cycle, so the cycle's 2 months, hypothetical, we're going to send them a letter after we run the street and we capture the reading. Today, we don't send those letters certified, but this might prompt us to want to move to a certified process where we know that they've actually received the letter on a certain day. And then if we're consistent with if we're applying the water policies approach, they would have up to 30 days to notify us that they want to appeal that or utilize this leak adjustment policy.
So if we attempt to notify them and we can't, by letter, do we then call them if we don't hear back? If somebody's got a leak that we can see is happening, substantial leak, then...
Our current practice is we do not do a follow-up phone call. So our current practice is when the leak alarm is triggered, Michael in the Public Works Department sends a leak letter out to anybody who had 24 hours of continuous usage. And as Councilmember Koberstein pointed out, sometimes it's literally just the toilet fixture that's stuck, and sometimes they're not very substantial. We could tie the policy into upon receipt of the leak letter, and if they don't do anything about it, because we have had that where we've actually sent out 2 or 3 leak letters, and it's about the third one where before it was like a little leak that happened, never fixed it. The third month you had a complete pipe burst, so all of a sudden it was a lot of water that was actually wasted. So we could build the policy in such a way where maybe we tie it into you've received 1 leak letter and then fix the problem and filed an appeal within 1 month of receiving the bill. We can easily add some language in there.
Is that making it sort of overly complicated? I mean, yeah, so why don't we just do it off the bill? I mean, these leak letters strike me as, first of all, oftentimes they're insubstantial amounts of water. Other times they're because of automatic pool fillers. And we're going to get a lot of false positives. The bill is the bill is the bill. Back to the Future. I don't know.
And the leak letters are required of us by law because of the California water restrictions and
no,
drought
it's great.
restrictions.
It's great that we send them. It's just I don't. I mean, these are exceptional. I presume these leak adjustment policies, it's exceptional circumstances, right? I mean, I've gotten leak letters in the past, and guess what? My bill's been $5 higher, and maybe I don't know what the problem was.
When you drive by, you know right then that you have unusual amount of water
Once the data is, what happens is currently Public Works staff drives every street within the city. It transmits the data to a card that they have. They bring it into City Hall. We download the data. There are issues with meter reads sometimes. I think this month we had to go out and reread about 40 meters. But what happens is once they download the data, it will automatically tell us if there's anyone that had 24 hours of continuous usage. So it is pretty, usually within a day or two, we'll know it is fairly immediate, just how quickly staff can actually download the data.
But that happens once a month.
Yes, currently we do it when they do the meter reads for billing. For the new proposed process, we will only bill every other month, but we'll still go out and read the meters every month. So that way we will be notified if there's any leaks, so we can notify people as soon as possible so we can save some of our water.
So we can see that the meter was running for 24 hours, but we can't see whether it was substantial or not.
We could see how many units were used.
Oh, okay.
So it would give us the amount of units, so you would have a good indication if it was substantial or not substantial.
So if it's a substantial leak, is it worth having a phone call policy on a leak letter? You're not wanting to create more work for you, but wanting to see if every once in a while there's a situation where the leak is substantial so that we can move on it quickly and allow the folks to move on it quickly.
I think that's reasonable, and I think we can talk internally about what a threshold is that makes sense for us to dial 911 or their actual phone number. But I think we should be able to look at something and determine if it's something of a scale that prompts us to want to knock on the door or telephone them.
So then it seems to me that with the bill would be whether it's 1 or 2 months, and then if there's a severe situation, it's the letter goes out and then a phone call if the letter's not responded to. So with the bill seems sufficient.
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't be in favor of a certified letter just because a lot of people aren't around to sign for them, or, then you're running to the post office. I'd almost prefer like a door hanger or something. I mean, the letter or door hanger, I think, is fine to let people know it worked in this case. It just took a long time to figure out where it was. The leak, I mean.
I would like to, we can coordinate with Michael to find out about how many leak letters we send a month, because if we're looking at going every other month billing to try to save some time from Public Works staff, and now all of a sudden if they have to have door hangers for every leak, it could inadvertently end up to a lot of extra work for the Public Works crew.
I thought maybe you knew right when you were there and you could just go stick something on the door while you were there, but it doesn't sound like it works that way.
Yeah, so I think if the push is for efficiency over the 2-month billing cycle, then however we can manage this and create a model for efficiency, but also with some alert system for something that looks like it's out of control.
So for what I'm hearing is that for how quickly they have to file a leak adjustment with us, it's within 30 days of actually receiving their bill. Also, just a good note. A good point on our current policy. In order for us to approve a leak adjustments, we actually do have to have proof that the leak was fixed. So that is something they actually have to give us invoices and proof of payment that it's actually been fixed. As far as how many consecutive billing months that we want to grant any type of leak adjustment, currently it's 1 month that we'll grant it. So if council can provide direction on if we want to include it to 1 month or do it at 2 months. And this is something that once, if we do change to every other month billing, we might have to come to City Council later if the 1 month isn't feasibly working for us. So we can definitely, council has the ability to change the policy as necessary.
As long as there's an appeal. I mean, if there's an appeal process, then that's the catch-all. I mean, we'll see. I like the idea
1 month,
of,
right? Yeah. Okay.
I like the idea of a maximum credit. I mean, I guess we don't have that, but I really like that idea. I mean, besides protecting our liquid resources, we've also got to protect our financial resources, right? And so,
think it poses some issues on the commercial side, though. I mean, in the residential, you've got pretty much the standard usage for people, and I could see where in commercial accounts, and we know this from the water study and all that information, there are some that use a whole lot more water than others. And so maybe it's a cap for the average, and then it's the appeal. Everything gets subject to appeal, which is number 7 in the current policy that says there are no appeals.
And so 50% of excess for 1 month.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can look at it based on the average over whatever the time frame was that you'd.
You're right.
So there it is.
Without a maximum dollar amount.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really not inclined to invite appeals to the city council. I think we're already inundated with appeals for various things, and I think we were working on a path, at least informally, to reduce the number of appeals to get to this body. I think it interferes with our work. So that's why I asked the question early on, what is the framework for allowing an appeal? And I don't think it's just because I want to appeal. That's something we need to work on. I would rather have some I don't know what it is, some factors to say, yes, I think I would almost like leave it to the discretion. There are no appeals unless staff says, I don't know, it's legal probably, who knows, unless staff deems that there are exceptional circumstances that say, look, we would like to get input by the council. Otherwise, no appeal.
It would be helpful for staff to, and this is one of the reasons we added this phrase into the staff report, that given the potential scale of loss, staff recommends establishing a maximum cap for commercial customers, or alternatively note that losses beyond a certain amount would be considered on a case-by-case basis. So it's helpful for me to have some guidance on where we draw the line, if we draw the line at all. And we can do it by a percentage of the average use, or we could establish a dollar figure that triggers me to move this to the city council. I think it is going to be extremely rare when we see something, for example, in excess of $10,000, right?
Hopefully.
And so with contracts, is $5,000 our number in most cases? Contracts, just a typical contract in excess of $5,000. Or 25. So city manager can sign agreements up to
25.
25,000. So I wouldn't recommend a number north of that, but something in the 10 to 20 range feels like a number that would make me feel more comfortable knowing what your threshold is for addressing these water leaks. Or
That makes
others.
sense to me. So that up to a certain point, it's your discretion of where it goes, and then if it's over that,
I'm authorized to provide a leak adjustment up to a certain amount, but I would feel comfortable knowing what that cap is.
I like the city of Pleasant to have $200 for residential and $1,600 for commercial as the caps. And then, I don't know what happens in that city after, if those are maxed out.
My concern would be I would want this case to come forward where our numbers were so much higher than what that cap would be. And it's creating this hardship for a beloved business in our community that we want a part of our community. I want to make sure we see
need
it.
to do, we're I don't want to talk about his case because I think his case will come forward, right?
All I'm saying, I just want to make sure that that is with what we're saying.
If there's some threshold, and because that case is above that threshold, we would bring that to you.
Right.
So you would bring us that, and you would also bring us wastewater as something that we would not be giving a credit generally for wastewater, but that would be something that you bring to us in unusual circumstance?
I would recommend the commercial leak adjustment for for water and sewer for commercial, just because they're not based on the winter average. However, I do like the caveat that if the leak occurred outdoors, it's automatic, but then if it's indoors where the water actually did go into the sewer system, where that would have to go to city council or to the city manager up to his threshold, because commercial does it's a month-to-month basis, their sewer amount does change where residential doesn't. So that would be my recommendation on what other agencies allow.
Does $5,000 to $10,000 sound like a range and a threshold range on something like this? Does that somewhere in there sound reasonable?
That seems like a lot.
It does.
Doesn't it? Like, I mean, Pleasanton is much more. I mean, I'm not expecting that there's going to be thousands and thousands of dollars or people that are coming to. I mean, I hope.
Most leaks are small, usually within the 50 to sometime, I'd say average maybe about 250, and I can get exact numbers for you based off of the past 2 years that we've done the leak adjustment policy and been tracking it. The high side is maybe 300, so I feel like those are reasonable amounts, and anything above that, but I believe what Mayor Ellsworth is talking about, the maximum limits for Mark to
Yes.
either deny it before it would go to city
So
council.
my concern is if we have some cap of 1,600 and anything over that has to come to us, then we would get in a situation that I think Paul was concerned with, that we might have more to deal with at this level than we wanted.
Yeah. But on the other hand, maybe that's appropriate. I mean, I mean, for commercial leaks, how many are going to be over $1,600? Include, water, sewer combined.
I think it depends on the size of the meter.
Yeah.
Residential is pretty easy because almost everybody has the same size meter. But when you get into commercial, you got some people who have 2-inch meters, you got some people who have 6-inch meters. So maybe this is something where the staff could take a good look at what average bills are across the commercial categories and help us out with a number or something.
And then we could apply the percentages for the residential, how often we add the adjustment. You say it's about 3 or 4 a month, and the total number of residential users of our water system is what number?
I believe it's about 2,500.
So 2,500 divided by 3, or 3 divided by 2,500 would be the percent that we're getting on a monthly basis. 3 times 12. So we're getting about 36 out of 2,500. Let's see what the number is. 36 divided by 2,500. So we're getting 1.5% a year. And so how many commercial customers?
A couple hundred.
200?
Yeah, 200 to 300.
So let's say it's 300 times 1.5%. That's about 4 to 5. You can expect about 4 to 5 of them a year, which is a lot. We've had none. So we're going to be spending some money, essentially. If maybe commercial has better, maybe their plumbing is better, and therefore there's less likelihood of response. But we are going to be having an additional liability with the creation of this policy, if it's at the same percentages that the residential program is at. And if the residential program is about 36 a year, and if the number, it's about $200 on average, that's about $7,000. And so if the commercial is more expensive, $5,000 to $10,000, something like that.
I was able to look up the information for the last quarter for our leak adjustments, just so I can give you some solid numbers, at least for one quarter. For Q2, the leak subsidies totaled $2,500 for residential. There was excess of 394 units of water. And then here were the following leak. There were 9 of them for a 3-month period, so three a month. 6 were for irrigation leaks, 2 were broken pipes, and 1 was a leaking toilet. So that kind of gives you an idea. And that's pretty average from what we report every quarter.
We can bring you an option or two at the next meeting, and you can fill in the blank. And so we can approach it that way, and I can give you a recommendation on a number that might make sense given the scale of what we see out there when we dive a little deeper on the numbers.
I think that sounds
Lower is better.
That sounds good. I mean, but I do look at the fact that other cities have for commercial policy, and if we kind of look at what their averages are, maybe there's a wheel that's already been invented, that we can kind of apply here.
Well, the other thing is, I think our current policy, we have hardship agreements, right, for people who still can't, after they get the credit, they might get extra time, to pay off the excess, and I would think there'd be reason to extend that policy to commercial.
So does that sound okay
No.
to work forward with?
You wouldn't? Gosh, we spend so much time talking about our small businesses during the water rates and the impact of those costs on them, which could cripple a business. And if we gave somebody a 50% credit and then they still had an enormous amount of money to pay off, what's wrong with the hardship agreement?
Yeah, I would be happy to consider that if it ever got to the city council.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then the final item for consideration is for commercial leak adjustment. Do you want water only or water and sewer?
And it seems like your recommendation was for both, right, for the commercial side?
It was for water and sewer, but I do like the caveat about if the leak occurred outdoors, then they would, get the credit. If we know it went into the sewer system, that would probably rise to Mark's threshold or the city manager's threshold or city council for appeal.
So it sounds like we're sort of halfway or 3/4 of the way towards a policy that could be broadly, and then we at some point will need to turn our attention to the existing business, but it doesn't sound like that's going to occur at this moment in time. We need the policy first, and then once we have a policy, then we can look at the specific applications, which are potentially now 2, it sounds like, commercial.
Can I understand this again on the wastewater side? You're saying if the leak is outside, it is eligible, and if it's inside, it's not?
That is correct, because if it's outside, the assumption is if it occurred outside, the water's actually not going into the sewer system, so it's not causing any additional work on our wastewater treatment plants or anything on that side of it. So if it's indoor and the water's actually going into the sewer system, then even though it's quote-unquote clean water, it still goes through the same processes at the wastewater treatment plant, as opposed to outdoor. If it's irrigation leak, it just goes right into the water and it doesn't affect our wastewater systems.
I kind of have a totally different view of that if it's an irrigation leak, too bad. We don't all have to irrigate outside, and have the city pay the cost if your irrigation has a problem. I'm actually more sympathetic to the inside leak that somehow is going into the sewer system.
That's super insightful, because if you think about, in general, it's the outdoor. If there's any leaks that I've ever seen, it's always in the sprinkler system, right? Compare it more likely, right? And guess what? Well, toilets. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's sort of counterintuitive. There's the, thinking about it from that's the water's being processed versus well, wait a sec,
So do you have enough direction?
Still not completely sure on the water and sewer adjustments. I can definitely work some more information, bring back a proposed policy, but also providing more information on cap limits, and maybe city council can decide at that time so we can solidify the policy. So I have enough to move forward with.
I just had one question. So that one on the leak adjustment, when it's inside, we have more expense on our side. Is that what you were saying? And the outside, the question that Mary just brought up, that was more about water being used.
That is correct. So we have more expense if it actually goes into our sewer system. Let's say if the leak is for 100 excess units, it's indoors, that 100 excess units is actually making its way through our wastewater system. If we have 100 units and it's outdoors, it's just going right into the ground and not actually affecting our wastewater system.
Okay, thank you.
So to me, hopefully that's enough to at least form things further than we were when we started, and when it comes back, we should be able to finish it.
That is correct.
Yep.
So, and I plan on incorporating these, and if I can do the research, actually having this as part of the agenda that's published on Friday for February 26th meeting.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mitz. A final comment is that it'll be very interesting to see this potential 1 billing to 2 billing change, which is, there's sort of some relation to this, which is why I'm saying it right now. Sort of efficiency of staff and versus costs, right? Very interesting to see how that plays out.
And I think because that's coming on the next agenda as well, the discussions will inform each other. So I think that's great that both can be there. Okay, so thank you very much. Moving on to 10.5, this is review of a draft ordinance proposing to amend and restate St. Helena Municipal Code, Chapter 17.136050, temporary uses, to create a temporary use permit and an administrative review process for such permits citywide. Is it required that I read this sequence determination here? No. Okay. So I'm going to hand it off to Noah Hausch, the planning director.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth and members of the council. As mentioned, the item before you tonight is the review of a draft ordinance to amend and restate part of the zoning code in order to create a temporary use permit. It's important to note that this is not a first reading, so this is a council review and discussion item to provide direction to staff. Upon hearing the direction from the council, staff will amend the draft that's before the council and bring it back for adoption either to the city council directly or back through the planning commission process, depending on the scope of the proposed revisions. So, Cindy did remind me I have to turn this on. Just to summarize, the project or the proposed changes would memorialize existing allowances or proposed allowances for certain limited uses, create mechanisms for temporary events to occur in the community, and then also create a similar mechanism for temporary uses to operate. And there's timelines associated with each of those specific elements, and they generally are different as in the proposed draft. So just a little bit of background. There's more in the staff report. But essentially, staff received direction from the council through the goal setting and then as a part of the downtown economic strategy to create a temporary use permit. The Planning Commission reviewed that draft that's before the City Council, and the City Council reviewed it again in October. The council at that time expressed some concerns over the draft, asked staff to move forward with the temporary ordinance and then bring back a permanent one for more discussion and direction. Since then, we've had one pop-up use take advantage of the temporary use permit, and they are operating on Main Street next to the Chamber. It's a lovely store that provides some home furnishings. So moving forward, as I mentioned, the draft ordinance proposes to memorialize that certain temporary activities are permitted, such as construction yards, emergency facilities, directs where filming is regulated, and so it not only memorializes certain processes as permitted, but then references what is regulated under other sections of the code. And it does allow nonprofits to conduct fundraisers and other events as a by right element. So that's an important note. And then it does create a temporary use permit process for events such as a concert or a play, uses, which most people are familiar with the pop-up term, whether that be a retail store or a museum or a restaurant, and then more typical temporary uses such as seasonal sales lots or a temporary structure. And then, as I mentioned, each of them have various timelines as identified in the code. I'm happy to answer questions. So we set hours. There's regulations that are directed as a part based on the zoning regulations, but they are more flexible. That's important to note. There's some mechanisms that ensure the property, if it was an empty lot, it's returned back to its original state, so there's not kind of blight and kind of some things that would remain from the approved use. And it should be noted that staff is asking and recommending that the council expand the current allowance for a pop-up use. Currently, it's up to 90 days. What we're hearing from the one pop-up and some other folks who have been interested is that that's not really enough time to get situated and then make back some of your fee and additional costs. So currently, you would have to pay the $500 temporary use permit fee, a business license, which is between $75 and $100, and it could be higher depending on how you operate. And then obviously a sign and other startup costs. And so we are recommending both an extension on the 90 days currently for some period of time to allow this to serve as more of an economic stimulus. And then we are actually recommending that the council consider postponing collection of the fee for the temporary use permit for some period of time to get more traction and allow basically some more of the empty spaces on Main Street to fill up. That's obviously 100% before the council, but it is something we'd like you to consider as a element of this action. So there's significant analysis in the staff report regarding the project's exemption from CEQA or compliance with existing CEQA analysis, how the general plan policies support the creation of temporary use permits, and then obviously if we need to go back through the ordinance process with the Planning Commission or bring it straight to the City Council for a first reading will depend on the scope of the changes that are directed by the City Council. Some of the issues that have been discussed and are before the council today, currently, any event proposing more than 200 patrons to visit a site in one time, essentially a concert or maybe a play, that's a trigger that has to come before the City Council for approval. So up to 200 in one day could be approved at the staff level through the current process. Currently, there's a question is, should a formula business be allowed with a temporary use permit? When the Planning Commission reviewed this, they did recommend that formula business be allowed as a temporary use, and the City Council in their past review seemed to consider that as being okay, but we're asking for formal direction. And then finally, we're asking for direction on postponement of collecting of fees until a certain number of vacant storefronts are filled up or some other trigger for the temporary uses, and then also considering extending the current 90-day allowance for temporary uses such as a museum or a retail outlet to expand to 6 months or even 12 months, just to allow some traction and again, some opportunities for some additional outlay of cost to be recovered through their operations. So that's the summary of the presentation. We're recommending that the City Council review and comment on the proposed ordinance and direct staff to finalize the draft and return for a first reading. Whether that goes to the Planning Commission or not will depend on the scope of the changes. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Any initial comments, questions from the council?
I had a question for the 200 people. I was thinking about the Wonder Space that went in. Kathy Buck did that through the Children's Film Festival over in that larger building that's owned by the Masons. I forgot which one it's called. But in one of the space, and they had a lot of kids and people there. And I wondered how many people would that count to be 200 during the day? Because I would never want us not to do that kind of event. It was one of the most exciting, I thought, pop-ups of the year, where it benefited both people walking down the street and seeing something. It was beautiful with balloon arches, and it was a wonderful experience that went on for a couple of days. A lot of local families used it. So how would that be impacted?
So I'm imagining this. So staff would ask the applicant, what's your intent? And it's going to be kind of a judgment call. If it was a temporary use such as a museum or a film that happened to have a number of patrons, but they were spread out throughout the day, and maybe they happened to push over that 200, but it wasn't anticipated as being a concentrated event, staff would likely determine that to be able to be reviewed at the staff level and approved. But if it was something like a concert or a festival or a play where we would see a approximate number of seats, we would utilize that information to say, okay, you're anticipated to be over this trigger. You need to get council approval.
And this wasn't a movie. It was actually an interactive experience with goggles, and you could come in with technology, and young people from the Bay Area came and provided this for kids and adults in the community to have this high-tech experience. It was really visually exciting, and it was an experience that was built around the film festival.
So again, if it was not seen as something that would drive a high concentration of individuals at one time, but more spread out. What you're describing sounds more like a pop-up museum, which may end up triggering over 200, but on the surface wouldn't be readily available for staff to easily determine that. What you're describing sounds like something that staff would approve, whereas somebody who said, I want to do a Shakespeare in the play or in the park or a concert in the park, that's something that we would say you need to get council approval for that.
Thank you.
And I hate to be a contrarian, but I often am. Part of the reason we're doing this is because we want excitement in downtown, and we want things to happen, and we want experiences in downtown. And so why are we making it more difficult, and they have to come to the council if they're going to do an experience that's going to draw a lot of people? I mean, the only issue I see, frankly, might be parking, that they should resolve with you if for some reason 500 people are going to descend on one space for a period of an hour. But otherwise, the more the merrier. I mean, it doesn't really bother me. I feel that the less that has to come up to this level, the better. So, and you know, people can fudge their figures. Oh, well, I think actually only 180 people are going to come, you know. How do you know? So I'd really kind of like to leave it in your hands, and if things go crazy, we'll review the ordinance and change it. Might be good if things went crazy, you know.
Where is Jesse to record that for posterity?
And so that came out of the consideration with the planning commission. They had concern, and they at least wanted the council to weigh in on that. Staff is absolutely comfortable, and one option could be to change it that the city manager has to make that decision. There's a matrix that shows a variety of different jurisdictions in the valley, and they often vary from an administrative approval that the staff level does to the director to the city manager, and then on up. So that could be one that you could leave it to the planning director, or you could ask that the city manager take action on those as an option, depending on what the other councils are. Council members are.
How many people show up for music in the park? You know, I mean, that hasn't been an issue. Do we suddenly have to be counting people? I think we're trying to make this happen.
Mr. Doring, any comment?
No.
I think I agree with Mary, and I think that the judgment of the staff or the city manager, we can leave it in the hands of the staff or city manager. I don't know how to best to put that, but I think that, as we're saying, it shouldn't have to come up to this level. I think that the good judgment of the staff can determine what's appropriate, and if we have an issue, we can turn the ship around. So that's sort of how I feel.
Yeah, I had depends for number one, and I'm with hearing Mary and saying let's go for it. And so I can turn that to we don't need that unless when it's a problem, we can deal with it. If it is a problem, and just allow us to have more opportunity and experiences. And then I was yes for formula business. Let's try it. It's a great way to try it. Since it's temporary, it's not permanent, we can try it out. And then yes for the fee going away, postpone it. I say let's try to get more stuff on Main Street.
Any other thoughts on the other two items?
Can we say like from 200 up to 25,000 just to cover our bets here?
Sure. I think the term
I want to give you some authority, but
trusting staff's good judgment. I think.
Bottle Rock North, you want to see that?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you never know.
I have a question, Mayor Ellsworth. Is there any sort of conflict between our desire to have pop-ups have a longer period of time versus the rigmarole that we ask folks that are going in for, getting a regular business use permit is there a tension between, meaning that if, I mean, is this sort of a try before you buy and then those people will roll over, or is it more really aimed at sort of temporary uses?
So staff seeing it, and I've seen it work in both ways. So it could be one where it's like a temporary marketing event for some type of maybe national brand that's trying to gain some recognition in certain regions. But it's also where a existing business may be able to expand into a storefront next door that happened to open up, or maybe try a different business model, or sell a new product or something. And this would allow them to do that without going through the, $6,000 3 to 6 month process for a full use permit. And then on the flip side, it also doesn't grant the permanent rights that vest with the property that a full use permit does. So under state law and CEQA, no temporary use can go longer than 12 months. So there is a hard stop at 12 months for any temporary use. And that would be clearly communicated in the approval. And so someone who is successful and was wanting to continue and knew that they needed a real use permit in order to continue with their action would have to apply ahead of time in order to move that application forward, to vest the rights.
I have a question. Who is the intended applicant? The business, the user, or the business, or the owner of the property?
As I've seen these, it's typically the business owner, similar to a use permit. Occasionally, a property owner will pre-entitle their property to, as they're trying to lease, they'll be able to be more attractive to certain tenants or certain specific types of tenants. So 1111 Main Street, the space next door to Sunshine Market, as they were coming through for design review to get the design approved, they also applied for a master use permit and asked for 5 specific use types that could be pre-approved. So then when they were going through their marketing and leasing process, they could say, this use requires a use permit and a restaurant is pre-authorized there, as an example.
The reason I asked it, I noticed that San Francisco's, the applicant has to be the owner of the property. And I go, I wonder why that is.
Yeah,
and it makes sense. So they're saying, well, we're not really regulating a business. It's not a business yet. It's a use, and that the property owner should be the one weighing in on what uses are allowed on his, her, or their property. So yeah.
We absolutely require property owners to sign every application.
Okay.
They have to grant their authorization.
Understood. Thank you.
I'm going to open it up to public comment. If there's anybody in the, okay, I will close the public comment. Any thoughts?
I just, I have one other issue. It relates to the formula business and the signs. I think it's paragraph B that says these things are not going to be subject, right at the very beginning, to the limitation on where the merchandise is placed, and they're not going to be subject to sign requirements. And I think they should, frankly. Do we want everybody to start dragging everything out on the sidewalk? And doing this pop-up on the sidewalk? I don't think so. And we just really did open up the sign regulations to give people a lot of temporary sign things. They ought to at least have to comply with that and not have balloons and streamers and who knows what, which we generally don't allow. So, I can live with a formula business if they still have to comply with signs and they still have to keep the merchandise inside the store, if we're talking about a retail thing. If you're doing some event that's an outdoor event, obviously that's different. On the time and the fee, I kind of think maybe there should be a sliding scale on the fee. If you only want to try this for 3 months, I know your time might be $500, but maybe you should pay a lesser fee. And on the contrary, if you're going in and you're actually doing something for the whole duration, your fee should be, in theory, that you could be up to the $500 then, because in theory you are going to have the chance to maybe establish the business and it wouldn't be such a hardship.
That was one of the things that was brought up to me by somebody, was the 3-month period with the $500 fee was maybe not enough time for them to really recoup what they were putting in, but if we extend that time, that may make it
What about 250 to 1,000? It's $1,000 if you take the full year.
There may be some issues with that. So the fee is based on the staff time to review and analyze the project. And so we can't arbitrarily tie it specifically to the length of the pop-up. It has to be tied to the cost of the city doing the work. So there may be a little bit of challenge with that. I can work with the city attorney's office to try to come up with something that's meeting the intent of the council.
Another approach here, and part of the rationale here on the postponement of the fee is we're spending the money no matter what. Basically, it's in-house cost. There's an opportunity for some fee recovery, but the rationale is with this significant number of vacancies downtown, adding some kind of activity to those spaces adds value to the neighbors that are struggling to see customers walk in the door. And perhaps an alternative here is I'm very comfortable, for example, suspending this fee for a year. And we also heard from the initial tenant that there was a paint job that was part of the tenant improvements to get the space ready. And that was several $100s on, I think it was $700-ish on top of our fees. And so with a business planning to be there for 3 months, it didn't really, it raised the question of whether it was even a good idea to give it a shot. So I would recommend that another concept is we revisit this a year from now and we tell you how many showed up, how many vacancies do we still have. I'm not anticipating that we would lose a lot of potential revenue for postponing at least the $500 staff review fee. And we could discuss, some scaling on the business license or another approach on the business license. But I think at least the $500 staff review fee may be one that we can revisit a year from now with some data.
And I do think, before I lose my thread on it, talking about the signs, I do think that there's a consistency in St. Helena, and I know that we're trying to bring more energy, but I do think that also that having to comply with what everybody else has to comply with and where the merchandise is. So if we're trying something new, at least it fits into what is sort of expected or consistent with the rest of the block.
How much does that cost somebody to be able to comply with the signs or be able to do that?
It's less of a fee cost. It's more, so the flexibility is built in just to try to anticipate the unanticipated elements of a new business. So the Christmas tree lot is a good one where they typically fence their whole lot. There's not an opportunity to put a sign except right hanging on the fence, where normally you're required to set it back or it would have to be looked at through some alternative lens, which is what this language is trying to capture. However, I think the size and location limitations that are in the code could easily be applied to temporary uses and wouldn't have an impact on the cost of them doing business.
I just want to get some of them happening.
It makes sense. We don't want it to be cost prohibitive.
And I would just add to the point that I think Councilmember Koberstein and Vice Mayor Doring mentioned, is that we have recently made allowances in our sign code to be more flexible, especially for new businesses. So I think the combination of those additional new business sign allowances and the existing code would absolutely both give some flexibility to a new pop-up while also maintaining kind of the community aesthetic and expectations for signage.
Because, for example, the huge balloon arch in front of Wonder Space caught everybody's attention, and more than anything, and it was what was exciting about the space. People saw it and said, "What's going on?" We told people about it. All of the other advertising, I don't think, did as good of a job as that huge, beautiful balloon arch. Kids love balloon arches. Could that still happen?
So it's funny because balloons are a very specific thing in our code, and there's all kinds of odd language. However, staff could look at something like that as a feature rather than a sign. And so I think there is some flexibility, especially given that the other elements of the proposed language reference the development standards, but allow some flexibility in how they're looked at to accommodate those types of things.
I have a thought. So we don't allow formula businesses in our town. And yet if you were to give a formula business like a 3-month pop-up, great. But a 12-month, that seems really long to me.
we do allow formula businesses, just not formula restaurants.
Sorry, I'm being
No, but-
incorrect.
Our zoning code currently does not allow formula business without a use permit. And so what we're talking about is allowing them under a temporary use permit. And I do have some issues with it because a formula business is a standard thing that has been sort of tried and true, and it should work. It's not like somebody's, oh, I think I want to try this business and I'm going to come in and see if I can make it take off. So, but, you know, if the rest of you are comfortable with formula business, it's okay with me, but I tend to agree with David that it shouldn't be a year long. I don't know. And maybe by the time we get through this, we will be changing our zoning code anyway on formula business, but.
It just seems like an end around. I'm sorry, I should have been more clear originally. Given the requirements that we put on formula businesses for actually operating in our town, aside from restaurants which are prohibited, it does seem a little bit of an end around, and I don't.
So just to add to this, so part of the definition of a formula business is kind of standardized architecture and standardized look and feel of their business, and it's unlikely that a formula business who was trying to capture all of those elements would go in through a temporary element or temporary mechanism because they wouldn't want to do the investment. So as I mentioned, it's typically when you look at what formula business is utilizing a pop-up element for, it's just to make a splash, and it truly is a temporary element. Sneaker companies are the ones that are notorious for doing this, and they'll do something really interesting, sometimes bring in a temporary building and really activate just an empty lot or something like that, utilize an alley space to just try to make some interest. And from what we heard from Cosmont, I mean, that's what we need to do. And so
those are short-term uses, so does it make sense to have a limit on that to 3 months, whereas for everybody else, it's 12 months?
I think, you know, going back again to the rationale, part of the strategy here is to fill up vacant space. And let's say we have a dozen spaces vacant today, approximately. I mean, part of the rationale here is to fill up those spaces as quickly as possible. And I did ask our staff recently, how many telephone inquiries or other inquiries have we received from any formula business in the country? And the answer is 0. And so over the past, it's about 4 months maybe now that we've had this in place or talked about it. We haven't had a single inquiry from a formula business asking whether we have a 3, 6, or 12-month temporary pop-up process. But our guess is we wouldn't receive a lot of inquiry, partly based on the fact that we haven't received any to date.
That puts a question in my mind. Has there been any engagement by the business community on this ordinance or the Chamber of Commerce? Any direct contact with you in terms of thoughts and opinions and direction?
Not formally. There's individual members have talked to us about it. Some of the real estate community has been very excited. There was some folks heading into the holiday shopping period who were trying to get something done, but they weren't organized enough to address there were some ABC elements. People wanted to serve alcohol and wine, and so unfortunately nobody was able to kind of get it off the ground in time.
I know we've had a lot of fairly significant discussions about downtown and business, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of engagement, at least maybe at the public meetings and maybe from the Chamber of Commerce regarding these issues. I think it would be important to get that feedback. I was just wondering if you got in direct feedback on some of the things we've been talking about over in the last month, goal setting, those kinds of things, downtown streetscape. This item is very important to the business community.
So just briefly on that,
I'll open up.
Yeah, and as she's approaching, I'll also mention that I have had more engagement with the chamber recently and have been attending, or if I'm unable to attend, like tomorrow morning when I'm on an airplane, I've submitted some comments about some current issues with the city, and I'm receiving those from the chamber as well. And one of the decisions that the chamber board made recently was to have a participating board member attend council meetings, and I'll turn it over.
So I'll open the public comment. Thanks for being here.
So my name is Casey Garrett, and I am a board member of the Chamber of Commerce. And we are trying to, we have board meetings, and we are talking a lot about downtown, revitalizing downtown. I'm also a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker, and there is a lot of concern about vacancies on Main Street. On the chamber's note, I have to say that we're really trying to see what we can do, and we love the idea and support pop-ups. From a real estate perspective, the landlords, some of them the rents are really high, and so it's very, it's a cost prohibitive situation sometimes for people to come in and do something for 3, 6, 9 months. There are people that are interested. And so I think by waiving the $500 fee, that's great. So, but going back to revitalizing the downtown, the chamber is definitely working with Mark and, well, no, too, but I was going to say, I'm just trying to come up with some ideas. Should we talk about some of the ideas that we were talking about? Well, we can't. I mean, it is like even the basic, you say sip and swirl on the second and fourth Saturdays in the summer. We are trying to get people to come down and spend money on Main Street. Same thing with the holidays. The businesses were really open to staying up or open a little bit later until like 7 p.m., which is nice. And we're trying to just divide up, and on the board, Aaron from Sportigo, et cetera, are, going block by block, trying to figure out what people want and need, and then making sure that everyone on the street is communicating or just supporting the same vision, which is business and activity. So does that help at all? Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts or no?
Well, I think the more dialogue we have, the more ideas we put together, and the more we all work together, I think we'll be able to figure this out. I mean, it's an issue happening in many, many, many towns, but we have the advantage of being small and being able to communicate with each other. So I do think that if we just keep it up, we will find some ways through this.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you. The discussion about the length of time for a formula business, is there a way to separate, for somebody who's not a formula may have less resources to come in, and so giving them an extended period. If it's a formula business, is it allowing them a 3 or 6 month period as opposed to a 12-month period? Is there a way to have that discussion to see if we can separate them? If there's a value to that? We don't have to make any hard decisions tonight, right? This is more of a discussion.
We're attempting to narrow the focus so we can bring you back a first reading.
Okay.
And in addition to the synergies with other businesses, and because I think one of the concerns of the current business community downtown is the vacancies are potentially motivating potential customers not to stop, to keep going, and to come back another day when there's more activity and vitality downtown. The indirect value of filling up the space is there are products that sell and generate revenue for the city and help to fund operations. And so that's a derivative benefit. And that's why we didn't try to define what the trigger would be for when we maybe back off on some of the flexibility. But we wanted the council to think through the idea that perhaps there's an initial phase of trying to fill up the spaces, and we know it's going to be tough as we get closer to the sidewalk project. There are going to be difficulties with anybody wanting to invest in a new business when the downtown is in the middle of a construction project. So we know there's a tough period of time coming in about 3 years, early 2021. And so that's a bit of the lens that we're thinking about as well.
I think it would be a success if we fill up the storefronts and if we are known as the community where there's stuff going on. And so I'm all for whatever we can do in this year period, and we can relook at it after a year.
I have reservations about a year for any business that's a pop-up, but I'm willing to give it a shot because I think we need that stimulus. I am concerned about the formula aspect of it, and that there's some way to pull that in. I mean, because we consider them uniquely anyway, it's not any different than what we have already. We have a very robust, vigorous, daunting use permit process that makes it difficult for folks. So it's not something, it would be consistent to say maybe that shouldn't be 12 months. Maybe that should be a look-see after 6 months. Maybe a check-in with the council, or are there complaints or whatever. I don't know.
You could also establish a cap, a cap as a trigger. Once you get to 2, maybe it's different period of time.
I'd rather just shorten the duration. I think the likelihood of formula businesses doing this is not significant because they tend to go analyze everything in their market area and they know where they're going to go. And to come and do this temporarily, I think is going to be very rare, other than I've never seen this sneaker thing you're talking about. But a 1 or a 2 day thing that is a product that you might think of as a formula product, that doesn't bother me. But I don't see us filling up stores with formula businesses. And, I'd be in favor of you tailoring it more narrowly, much more narrowly.
Does that give some direction to maybe have a few options as it comes back without leaving it too nebulous?
So what staff has heard is that a majority of the council is likely okay with eliminating the number of patrons trigger to change the review process. A majority of the council is likely okay with postponing collection of the fee for a 12-month period. And then a majority of the council is supportive of allowing non-formula businesses to pop up or operate for up to 1 year. However, formula businesses should have some shorter duration, potentially 6 months.
Don't forget the signs and the outdoor merchandise.
Thank you. And
please.
Sign and other aesthetic impacts need to be tailored specifically from the zoning code standards that exist.
Okay, I think that sounds like a good. And so we have enough now to move forward?
Yes, and so these changes are not significant enough to go back to the planning commission. It's essentially just minor tweaks, and so staff will prepare a first reading and bring it back to the city council for support.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for your hanging in there. Okay, so we have one more item, 10.6, review of fiscal year 2019-2020 budget preparation calendar will be presented by April Mitz.
And this is my even shorter PowerPoint tonight. We have one slide. So this is our operations and maintenance budget calendar for fiscal year 2019-20. Just know that some things, obviously, they could change a little bit, but this is a guide that we're following. We presented this to City Council last year, so I definitely don't want to read everything on the list. It's pretty straightforward. There's 2 items that I did just want to bring to council's attention. The first is the due date of February 28th for the nonprofit grant applications. Initially, the due date was January 31st, and we did extend it out another month, and the nonprofits we've talked to have been very grateful for that. And then the other thing I did just wanted to point City Council's attention to is that on March 26th, that is when the nonprofit grant applications are going to be presented to City Council. And we are also going to be updating the fiscal health diagnostic as well as the long-range financial forecast. So beyond that, I am here for any questions. This is just a receive and file report.
Any initial comments, questions from council? I'm going to open it to the public. Okay, we'll close that. And any comments at all as we close down? Well, thank you very much. And with that,
we're done.
I will adjourn the meeting. No, I gave, I was trying to, I don't think you did. I mean, I think, yeah.